two swords clash in a heated battle. Someone calls out that more goblins are headed that way. The battle rages on. The fighters cannot believe that one of their teammates is losing in the head of battle, and they ask him to work harder to stop them. Tanks are also asked to move to the front. They have to maintain formation and they are told to stay focused. The soldiers are in the wrong place and they need to fight if they don't want to die before the fight even begins. The soldiers yell that they do not want to do that. Meanwhile, a very suspicious hooded figure lifts the black hood from his head. The fighting rages on between the soldiers and the goblins, and it raises a large cloud of smoke. The soldier turns to the Necromancer, who is the hooded figure, and asks him to help as he promised. Then he kindly asks if that will be possible for the Necromancer. The Necromancer is feeling pretty smug about his abilities. He says that he could assist. After all, he is here as a mercenary, and he whips out his skeleton staff with pride. The skull on the staff calls out for power to come. He waves his hand and a wave of purple aura summons skeletons with weapons that march into battle. The skeletons launch at the goblins, and the fight resumes, with the bones fighting against the deadly green monsters. One of the soldiers watched in awe at the Necromancer, which was said to be the strongest authority lately. They had never expected to see the Necromancer in action in an E-rank dungeon like this. He would be a ranker for sure if he awakened. They knew the party leader was too relaxed, but they could not believe that a super powerful Necromancer was the reason, and they wondered how their leader had been able to recruit someone as strong as that. That was it, the status befitting the unique authority, Necromancer. The protagonist chuckled snugly, but there was nothing but death and disappointment in his eyes. Among the 7.9 billion people, only 1,000 people have it, a very rare profession. An army of marching skeletons glowing purple. However, summon an ordinary skeleton. The Bone had 1 E-rank who used a sword. Bone had 2 E-rank that wielded a staff. Bone had 3 E-rank who wielded an arrow. That's right, the Necromancer was, in fact, an irregular Necromancer. He was the skeleton Necromancer, the most basic among basic summons for a Necromancer. The soldiers wondered why their super powerful Necromancer was only summoning skeletons. The soldiers guessed it was because their super powerful higher obviously felt that an E-rank dungeon could be dealt with using only skeletons. The soldiers were so impressed that they even vocalized how jealous they were of his super awesome powers. Our guy could not believe that those ignorant buffoons were somehow jealous of his unholy bad luck. His name was Juding-hoon, and his profession was that he worked as a cursed Necromancer. His rank was E, and he was the one who controlled the souls of the dead, a Necromancer. However, none of these satisfied our guy. He was supposedly supposed to overpower enemies using frightening spirits and poisons. However, he had been cursed. Juding-hoon could somehow only summon skeletons. He was the lamest of all lame Necromancers. He was the one jealous of those guys. Around 10 years ago, humans began to receive unique abilities from the moment they turned adults at 20 years old. People walked around in the street, chilling and casually living their lives. The contents of the unique authorities were completely random. Some received authorities related to blacksmithing or sewing, while others received auxiliary authorities such as exploration, healing, or buffing. It was a roll of a dice to see what a person's ability would be. Since these abilities were all just given based on luck, not everyone felt great about it. Still, thanks to these abilities, people were able to survive the invasion of monsters. However, in any case, our guy became a Necromancer that everyone was envious of. His 3 skeletons, Bones 1, Bones 2, and Bones 3, stood proudly over the corpses of their conquered goblins. The soldiers cheered with joy at their victory. Meanwhile, the Necromancer stewed and groaned at the back. His growth stunted to where he could only summon E-rank skeletons until the day he died. So, he had become the E-rank dungeon hyper carry. Later that day, our guy informed his team leader that he was done with the work for that day. The team leader was happy as well as impressed. The main character reported that he had indeed completed the E-rank dungeon party mercenary job and the report as well. He would be going now, and the team leader said that they would see him later. The Necromancer sighed heavily about what a world it was. He wished that at least his skills would be so trash that people would not have expectations of him. However, he ended up with a skill that was halfway decent but not good enough. Now, the MC was stuck with hope for nothing, and it would be better if he had at least gotten a production type ability. However, no such luck in that, and all his skeletons were warriors. Even after becoming a Necromancer, his pay for that day after running the dungeon was only 40,001. A part-time job would likely pay more, and the filled Necromancer had to sigh at the waste of time. Still, since this was the only thing that he actually wanted to do, so he could not give up on it either. Suddenly, an announcement came on about the good news of that day. The good news was that the Dark Lord, who succeeded in clearing the lunar rifts last time, had become a ranker in just 3 years of being active. With that, South Korea officially had 37 rankers. They were only second behind the United States in the world, which was considered amazing. It was also the first time a hunter had become a ranker in just 3 years. Of course, that excludes the original hunters. It just goes to show just how powerful the authority of being a Necromancer is. The news announcer laughed that it was true. They were glad that their country had a Necromancer to call their own. The main character stares up in shock and then grits his teeth in anger because that was the thing that was driving him even more mad. That guy, who received his authority on the same day as our guy, was busy flourishing as a necromancer while Dinghun was busy suffering. Although they had received their powers on the same day, one of them was a cursed necromancer that could only summon skeletons until the day he died, and the other was already a recognized ranker. The situation was beyond frustrating, and our dude burned with hatred as he wondered how it was possible. After calming down for a second, he continued his stroll back to his place. The night was quiet and he seemed to be the only one in the area he stepped into. Our dude wiped the sweat from his brow as he acknowledged that it was possible. It was already a reality. Just because he could only summon skeletons did not mean that he could resent reality and sit still without even trying. So, Dinghun stepped out into a training center and he called his skeletons out to play. He used his special skill to summon an ordinary skeleton and the three popped out with their lance, sword and bow respectively. The first effect of his superordinary power was to consume 10 energy to summon the ordinary skeleton. He could summon up to 10 at once. The second effect of his rather inconvenient power was that he could name each individual skeleton. Dinghun had been genuinely surprised when he read that he could name the skeletons, and he had smiled, thinking that he had not seen a skill with such a description. He had thought back then that this meant it was something special and different. Of course, the MC had just been delusional back then. Tossing aside that painful memory, he stepped forward and happily greeted the skeletons before him, saying that it was great to see them again. He told them to take care of their weak tendons, and all the skeletons turned to face him. It was almost like they could understand him. He always got the same skeletons whenever he summoned them. The one with the huge sword and purple eyes was Bony One. He had the opportunity to give them names, so of course he made the names as lousy as possible. Lousy names for a lousy power. Bony 2 with golden eyes wielded a long spear, and Bony 3 with green eyes wielded the bow. It was time for them to train and our guy planned on being strict. Watching his boneheads train was our guy putting in the effort. The training involved having his skeletons practice their skills against the equipment he set up in the woods. At first, he had seen some results from doing that. The skeletons had previously struggled when fighting against goblins, but now they could easily handle 3 at once. Unfortunately, that was all they could accomplish and E-ranked remained E-ranked still. No matter how much harsher their training became, and even if the MC got a C-ranked teacher for them, they did not become any stronger than that. Our guy sighed about his very pathetic and sad life, but there was nothing else that he could do about it outside of mope. Some have said that someone living without a dream is more pitiful than someone holding a dream that could never be fulfilled. Suddenly, there was some deep and dangerous breathing from the grass in the surrounding area. Dinghun whipped his head around in shock and his eyes widened in horror to see the large footfall of a great beast. A beast with green skin and very sharp and large tusks. The creature grunted and the necromancer was appalled to see an orc on his training ground. He could not imagine what that kind of beast could possibly be doing there. Bonehead 1 was suppressed by the presence of a strong being. All stats were reduced by 20%. Bonehead 2 was also unfortunately suppressed, and so was Bonehead 3. The necromancer was even more appalled than before at how useless his boneheads were. The fact that an orc was here meant that there was a dungeon break in a nearby dungeon. A dungeon break is a phenomenon where a dungeon that has not been cleared enough breaks and lets monsters outside of the dungeon. The orc raised its huge weapon with deadly intent, and Dinghun watched in fear, cursing and thinking he did not want to die here. He yelled for his skeletons to block the attack with all of his might and intent, and the axe came swinging down. Surprisingly enough, Bonehead 1 did raise his sword. But a fat lot of good it did because they got blasted away almost instantly. Bonehead 1 and 2 were unsummoned immediately and the necromancer began to panic. The MC cursed as the orc began to charge at him and he turned tail and ran with all of his might. The bonehead with the spear was still on the ground and he launched it, managing to hit the orc on the head. Our guy was shocked but praised Bony 3 for standing up for him, begging it to do something significant. Even with this shitty life, Dinghun still desperately wanted to live. He had 70 energy remaining, which meant that he could still summon 7 more boneheads. Quickly, he activated his skill to summon even more boneheads using his skill to summon ordinary skeletons. Bonehead 1 and Bonehead 2 got summoned again, and our guy commanded them to be the tanks so that Bony 3 could attack from behind. The orc grunted and growled in protest as he got attacked, and our guy stared in concern as his skeletons got whacked. Bony 1 took an axe to the head that cleaved him in half, but no matter how many times he got cut down, Dinghun would summon him again and again. He wondered how many minutes had already passed, gasping and panting for breath. He coughed out from exhaustion, and the orc growled. Our guy had finally consumed all of this energy. The blue page asked if he wanted to refill his energy and try resting. However, resting was absolutely not an option in this situation. His fingers curled into a shaky fist, but he still stood with the skeletons as they faced the orc. The orc growled, unimpressed by their continuous fight, and our guy wondered if this would truly be the end of his life. Suddenly, he got a notice that he should check the condition achievement message. The Mick had noticed something like that pop up some time ago, but he was not in a position to check that right now. Wait, but this thing said that he had unlocked a unique ability which was called the Cursed Necromancer's unique hidden condition. The condition was the 10,000 uses rule. Our guy was stunned when he suddenly got wrapped by a bright golden light. Incredible effort was required to upgrade his unique ability, and that effort involved using the skill to summon ordinary skeletons 10,000 times. Now, he got a congratulations message, and his rank would be increased to a D rank. The reward connected to the rank increase would soon arrive. Ding-Hun did not have time for the suspense as he was genuinely in a life or death battle, and he yelled at the system to hurry up. He would take anything. The orc growled as he raced to attack once more. Meanwhile, the MC's energy was refilled. The skill to summon ordinary skeletons has been upgraded to D rank. The skeletons suddenly were covered in a golden glow, and Bonehead with the sword gripped his weapon tighter. Suddenly, the orc swung and the skeleton raised his sword to block the attack. Amazingly, Boney's strength had become completely different and our guy's enemy was also refreshed, so he was feeling pumped about trying out his new skill. He summoned a skeleton using his new skill, consuming 10 energy. The boneheads were summoned. The main weapons of the new skeletons were selected and out popped a violet-eyed skeleton with a shield, another skeleton with ruby eyes and a staff with a glowing purple gem. The Necromancer was impressed that his skeletons could get weapons like that. They were a tank and a mage at that. The orc noticed more skeletons getting summoned and the news guys somehow made a rounded party with Boney 1, Boney 2, and Boney 3. The shield skeleton got ready and charged right at the orc fighting Boney 1 and 2. The orc was surprised to see them approaching as it was currently occupied. Without hesitation, the orc attacked the shield skeleton. However, the shield skeleton was strong enough to knock the axe right out of the orc's hand. The orc was shocked at losing his weapon. Suddenly, there was a huge explosion in the sky and the orc looked up to see that the mage skeleton had cast a fireball. The orc could not believe the sudden onslaught as it was attacked left and right by the other skeletons. Our dude watched speechless. The skeletons had defeated a strong orc for the first time, and the MC stared in awe. He had thought that his life was screwed. However, he grinned with joy at the realization that the world did not want him dead yet. The Necromancer happily slurped up a bowl of ramen. Staring at his status window, he could not believe it. The hunter Juding-Hun had been upgraded to a D-class Necromancer. He had never expected that his abilities would be the kind that could grow. This was all the motivation that he needed and suddenly he was all fired up. Effort had to be rewarded and there was no doubt about it. Although the MC did not know when he would be able to reach C rank. But still, he was still happy that he was able to upgrade at all. He happily slurped his ramen as he noted that he needed to go back to the basics. The power of an intermediate skeleton was impressive enough. He wondered what would happen if those skeletons somehow got even stronger. The main character wondered if the mage Boney 5 would soon be spamming Blizzard Storm attacks and if Boney 1 and 2 would become a Sword Master and Spear Master respectively. Alright, at any rate, Juding-Hun was pumped and he was ready to kick into gear. When he walked into work the next day, he heard his colleagues mumbling about a job that could be troublesome. Aside from the insurance premium, they were not sure if the hazard pay could cover the necessities. The MC paused for a moment when he heard the discussion and he wondered what was going on. One of the speakers wore the green badge of a C-rank level hunter and the Necromancer wondered what a guy that important was doing in their guild. Suddenly, Ding-Hun was spotted and someone called out to him. It was the guild head who smiled wide and told the young man to come look at the big news that he had just heard. The head of the operation asked if our guy knew the pairing guild, the one established by Jipperang. The MC immediately replied that he did. Everyone in Korea knew the prestigious guild established by the Korean ranker Jipperang the Fine Bow. It looked like a group was interested in exploring a newly opened dungeon and they would need porters for the job. Besides, the pay was good too. The pay for that job was supposed to be 10 times the posted amount. Our dude was shocked and repeated the number in shock. The leader went on to say that they were even accepting E-ranks, so he wanted to know if the MC was interested. To be fair, all the other requests were trash anyway, and Ding-Hun realized that there was an opportunity ripe for the taking. However, he wanted to take a look at what kind of dungeon it was first. The leader showed the map of the dungeon requested. It was a newly discovered dungeon near Paju, and it was quite tough. 5 teams had already failed to clear it and our dude was really alarmed. He could not believe there had already been 5 teams in there. The rank of the dungeon was also rather undetermined and they could both guess why. The teams that tried to clear it were all amateurs, but this time the famous pairing was going in. So, he did not see how anything could possibly go wrong. Plus, our dude was just a porter and he did not even have to fight. All Ding-Hun had to do was to work his part and get his money. It all sounded very easy. He took a moment to consider and assess his options. The 10-fold reward was probably hazard pay for that kind of dungeon. If he was being honest with himself, he was also kind of mentally exhausted from that encounter with the orc the other day. However, the offer was way too tempting to pass up. Even the Dark Lord guy had said something in the interview. If he wanted to upgrade his rank faster, then he needed to go into dungeons above his level. There was no other way. The higher the rank, the bigger the risk. However, that also meant an abundance of opportunities and rewards. The MC desperately needed to grow. So, without any hesitation, he agreed to the terms of the contract. The guild master was elated and told the main character that he should not pass up a chance like this. Then, Ding-Hun asked when they would leave, and they were to leave a week from that moment, from Paju Station. So, the man got busy scribbling down his details on the application form. He then asked the head if he could take a week off just before the mission began. The man did not even hesitate and happily granted the leave, saying that he would even treat our guy to a meal soon. Ever the opportunist, the Necromancer asked for 2 meals. His boss was a little hesitant, but he agreed to that too. With all of the paperwork worked out, it was time for our dude to get busy. Taking up his skull staff that bubbled up a huge wave of purple aura, he got busy summoning skeletons. Ding-Hoon had a whole adventurous group of skeletons now, and working with them was nothing like the old days. He was so proud of the fact that all of the hard training had really paid off. The skeletons would keep growing stronger, so he told the first 3 skeletons to quickly hop to their position. If they kept up this kind of good work, then he would soon be able to become even a high ranker. He sure was aiming high, and he wanted to see everything that a D-rank skeleton could do. The skeletons got to work showing off their skills as they practiced hard in front of their master. They waved around their weapons, charging into wooden targets as they trained. The first 3 of course showed off their physical prowess, since by watching them, the main character could then assess just how much he had grown. The arrow shot by the skeleton soared through the air and it almost obliterated the bullseye. It was a masterpiece of a shot, and the Necromancer could not help but watch in awe. This was the power of a D-rank skeleton. It was so impressive that it was almost as powerful as a C-rank skeleton. He knew his skeletons had gotten stronger, but he had seriously underestimated just how much their strength could grow. First things first, he needed to change all his training gear cause they were getting obliterated out there. The wooden scarecrows were useless now, and it looked like he was going to spend more money. However, spending money was nothing compared to how great it was that his skeletons had become stronger. The real problem now was the Necromancer himself. Ding-Hoon had to think up a solution of what he would do if the opponents targeted him instead of the skeletons. It would not matter then if his summons were strong, because everything would end the moment he was attacked. He did not want to be left running for his life like the last time with the orc. Suddenly, he noticed something. The mage skeleton was standing there staring at him. Suddenly, the purple gem on its staff began to glow, and our dude was shocked as the staff was kind of pointed in his direction. He did not expect a mutiny to happen so quickly. He stuttered and asked the skeleton what was wrong, as he was rather surprised by this sudden and bizarre behavior. Suddenly, the MC found himself energized and surrounded by green magic. He did not even need to go on a training montage because his mage skeleton had basically read his mind and protected him with a manifested shield. Ding-Hoon was shocked to see the skeleton nodding and answering his thoughts. Then, all the skeletons responded like they could all hear his thoughts. The Necromancer was impressed by the growth, since they used to only follow his orders, but now they could express their opinions. He was then surprised about the air shield, and that the mage had another skill outside of fireball. This was very important knowledge. Suddenly, the skeleton with the shield slammed down the shield, and our guy turned in surprise at the odd behavior. The shield guy just wanted some attention, it seemed, and his eyes glowed blue. It pointed towards all of the broken gear, and for a moment the Necromancer was perplexed. The shield skeleton stood before our guy looking all menacing and serious. Suddenly, the sword skeleton saw the challenge and swung its weapon. As they fought, the shield skeleton noted arrows flying for its head. Bony 3 had joined in the fight. However, the shield skeleton easily lifted his weapon and blocked off all those troublesome attacks. The light of the sun illuminated the awe-inspiring picture of the skeleton standing proudly with its shield raised and all the arrows falling to the floor. Our guy was very impressed by this display of power, and he was happy to see that the shield was quite solid. The training practice went on, and the shield and sword skeleton continued to fight. If the Bone Knight helped out with the training, then the Necromancer would not need to spend money buying extra equipment. This time, he asked Bony 2 to try attacking him, and the skeleton responded with surprise. However, Ding-Hoon needed to test how safe the air shield was going to be. Bonehead 5, the mage, activated the skill called the air shield. Then, Bony 2 tossed its spear right at him, biting the hand that fed him. Our guy was low-key terrified, and he raised his hands to block his face. Fortunately, nothing hurt him even when he groaned slightly from the fear. When he opened his eyes, he grinned and thought the situation was not bad. Everything had worked out well, and he applauded the skeletons, who seemed really pleased about that. With that much confirmed, it was important to go right back to practicing. The skeletons go busy and fight hard, testing their weapons against the shield. They of course continued to test their weapons against each other as well, Bony 4 then switching to fight Bony 2 with his shield and Bony 2 attacking with his spear. The practice session was going well, and the glee-filled Necromancer was happy to watch their power grow. Suddenly, a notification popped up, telling him that the strength of each bonehead had increased by 1. He was surprised to get this notification, and then he got a congratulations that told him the status of Widow had been unlocked due to his first growth. Our guy was surprised as he checked out his status window. He could now see the stats of his power, including the level of his strength, magic power, ability, technique, and constitution. Then, he realized that if the bony ones was generated, then it was generated for the others as well. It turns out that the answer was yes, and the Necromancer could now see the individual strength of each of the skeletons in his control. He could see their strength, their magic power, their agility, technique, and constitution. He was very impressed by this fancy new upgrade and erupted in overjoyed awe. Thanks to the training of the skeletons, all of their stats were different, especially those of Bony 1 to 3 in comparison to Bony 4 and 5. All of our dude's efforts so far have not been in vain. Now, he just had to raise them comprehensively. So, he focused on all of the skeletons that stood at the ready. Smiling with pride and satisfaction, he decided to raise them so that they would become the world's strongest skeletons. So, the day passed and the training continued underneath the deep blue sky. Then, the day came and everyone had their backpacks on their back. Our dude even got a new fit and he looked pretty good. All dressed like a powerful necromancer. For the journey, he had packed with him a sleeping bag and more than enough emergency food. His position here was mostly to be a porter. He would be out of the way of the real damage and still make some substantial money. It was a good deal and he was ready to do what it took. So, Ding-hoon trudged forward with confidence, though he was sweating a little. Participating mercenaries were called over and told to follow the instructions. They must wait in front of the dungeon that they were planning to enter all at once. The dungeon was quite close to the Paju station and a dim energy could be seen at a radius of 200 meters. It looked pretty ominous. The hole that was inside the dungeon looked like an average and dun had been generated naturally. The other hunters were getting nervous just looking at the dungeon, and it looked like it would be a high difficulty dungeon. They had even heard that the thicker the color that was around the hole, the higher the chance that the dungeon would be more complex or difficult. Well, they were going in with pairing, so the other hunters shrugged off their fear that anything bad could possibly happen. And anyway, they just wanted to be done with this so that they could return home and eat some rice soup and saju. That idea sounded very good to them. However, our guy wondered if they truly could be considered safe just because they were adventuring with a big guild. It sounded like nonsense to him and he gritted his teeth in annoyance. There were lots of dungeons in this world and countless hunters that had gone missing inside of them. Some hunters faced beasts beyond their capabilities and had been dragged away by them. Some even piled high in a mountain of dead bodies. Many sacrifices and deaths that happened within the dungeons had been overshadowed by the luxurious spotlight of the high rankers. Despite all that, the necromancer tightened his grip on his bag, determined to go in and grow in power. He was going to put his life on the line and risk it all. Behind him was a lady, a sexy-looking lady. She called out to him and our guy, who seemed almost in a constant state of surprise, turned to her. Surprised. However, when he turned there was absolutely no one behind him. He was hearing ghosts now. Dong-hoon was sure that he had heard a voice, but there was no one there. Suddenly, someone said it was interesting and that they could feel that his energy was D rank and it was no more than that. That sort of roasting set our dude on the edge and he was nervous cause he still could not find who was talking. However, the person noted his E rank plate, and he was the porter on top of that. It was unnerving hearing someone talk about him and assess him when he could not even see them. Whipping around, the necromancer asked who they were, and he asked ever so politely if they would kindly tell him who they were since they were making him so nervous. However, the voice pointed out that they had asked first, asking our guy who he was. The stranger asked why the MC was busy hiding his ability from them, from pairing, and why he had decided to participate as a porter. It seemed this stranger had misunderstood something and he would happily clear up the misunderstanding if they could have the confidence to show their face instead of jumping to conclusions. Still, he could not believe that she had noticed such details, and he was low-key impressed and a little scared. Still, the pairing guild was full of high-rank hunters, so he did not see what difference a D or E rank hunter would make. Seeing our guy's concerned expression made the speaker even more suspicious of you, and he really was making an expression like a villain who had been found out. The speaker asked if he was a spy who received poor acting classes. He was taking pairing's intelligence capability too lightly, and did he really think that they would not notice that he was a spy sent from another guild? The lady then revealed herself as she walked with pride towards our guy. He was stunned to see the lady appear out of thin air. He was even more stunned to see that she had a golden plate on her side that was only given to S rank or higher. That meant that she was among the first rank of South Korea's 37 rankers. She was the Dark Empress, Gi-soil, Pairing's guild master, and Jipperang's only little sister. It was quite intimidating to see someone marching right up to him with a frown on her face. Thanks to her unique assassination ability, she was the #1 person that he should not make angry. Leaving aside how scary she was, our dude could not believe that he would get the chance to talk to someone with that rank or title that he admired. She looked stone cold though, and he quickly rushed to explain the misunderstanding. He was not a spy from another guild and he was barely a D rank hunter, to be honest. If it was a competing guild of pairing, it would make more sense for them to send a more talented hunter. It did not make sense for a competing guild to send someone like him. It was a good argument, a great argument by how dark she went at his response. Suddenly, the seemingly stone-cold hunter giggled in amusement. She laughed, holding up her hands and apologizing, saying that she was sorry. To be honest, she had only just been messing with him. Ding-hoon was shocked by this sudden personality switch and he was left gaping. He could not believe his ears. The beautiful lady stood with a cheeky smile while severely underdressed for adventuring. Ding-hoon could not understand at all. He could not fathom why someone in her class would pull a prank on a nobody like him. Boredom was a likely explanation. Others around were starting to recognize her too, and it was becoming rather bothersome. They wondered why the Dark Empress was there and where she had come out from. Suddenly, the Necromancer had a thought and he wondered if the Dark Empress had done a background check on him. Certainly, training the skeletons like crazy might get the attention of rankers. Anyway, it was a God-given opportunity for a ranker to show him attention. She asked if he had gotten flustered because of her little sudden prank and she laughed in amusement. She apologized with her head bowed low, admitting that her little joke was rude. He was surprised about the apology, and she explained that she had just thought that it was interesting that a porter with an E rank badge would have the skills to house 5 D ranked energies inside them. Then, our guy realized that she could sense his skeletons, and he laughed nervously about that. He did not have anything to say because she was right. Suddenly, he had a thought and his eyes widened. This meant that she had grasped his strength with energy detection. The sweet-looking girl was still a considerably powerful ranker, and she smiled with amusement. He could not let his guard down around her. Actually, her older brother had asked her to join the second team's expedition as the scout, so she was looking for a porter. Then there just so happened to be a suspicious-looking porter standing around, so of course she had approached. So, it was a job offer, and she asked if he would be interested in scouting. He could be a volunteer, but it could get a little dangerous though. With that much skill, he should be the most capable among the porters, and it did not look like he would get scared and run away. However, our dude was totally shivering with fear, and he wondered where she got that analysis from. However, Miss Girl soldiered on, and she boasted that she had an eye for people like him. As for the reward, she promised to double it. It was a dungeon expedition with a high ranker, and she even promised to give double the reward. That was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so she asked if he was interested, and he immediately agreed to it. He could not lose this kind of opportunity, especially not when he was working hard to level up. So, the dungeon rank. Dungeon difficulty started for me all the way to S. Dungeons were of course filled with all sorts of monsters, and the rank was not set by the system, so humanity had to subjectively rank and quantify it. The S ranker called White Shadow was asked the dungeon's rank in advance. However, it was unfortunate that there was no such method to reveal such a thing. One could only go in and check for themselves. If they were to give one tip though, it would be to check the brightness of the color that surrounds the dungeon. The darker it is, the more likely it is to be a higher level dungeon. Even this was not accurate, and the association had to set up a standard. If it could not be cleared, even with 5 or more hunters of the same rank, it was to increase the rank. If 5 or more high-ranked hunters participated but it could not be cleared, then the rank would upgrade once more, and the corresponding dungeon would become designated as an S-rank dungeon. In the end, it was a method that inevitably required someone's sacrifice. The unranked dungeon that the main character was about to enter was also something like that. However, they could not just send their main forces in, so they sent in a scouting team first. Thanks to that, Ding-hun could smell the dungeon's air much faster than the other mercenaries. He got prepared as he entered the dungeon, bracing himself for what he would find inside. He was surprised to find a cave, with many ice daggers on the ceiling. Our dude paused when he saw the cave, but thankfully, he did not have problems with vision because of the luminescent pearls. Someone else pointed out the pearls, saying that if they took some of them then they could get a decent sum out of it. However, that line of thinking was halted immediately as another hunter reminded the opportunist that many hunters had died recklessly after touching items in dungeons. Everyone was a bit relaxed after entering the dungeon, and our guy could understand why. It was because almost everyone gathered had an high rank badge, except for Gisoil who had an S rank badge. Everyone was reminded not to get too relaxed and to prepare themselves. After all, they were inside a dungeon. First, Swift Blade and Little Fire would look around for one cycle, and they agreed immediately. Then the guide, Mr. Kang Sunwook, was called forward and he responded immediately. He was to look for an exit and cover for their porter. The guide had already suspected he would be asked to do something like that, and she asked if he was confident. The guide smirked and said that if he was not confident then his alias would cry. A slightly unusual alias guide. It was a name given by the system for being exceptionally good at finding their way in dungeons. With that much confirmed, Soil turned back to keep marching into the dungeon, telling her team that they should hurry up and set off. Then, the guide smirked at our dude and asked if he was nervous. The Necromancer was surprised by the question, but he admitted if he said he was not, then that would be a lie. The guide smirked and told the Necromancer to keep being nervous, and he was very confused by such a statement. The guide explained for his information that the dungeon had more than 1 or 2 suspicious things about it. What he was saying was that the Dark Empress, who was a high ranker, was not telling him to stay nervous for nothing. This dungeon was excessively quiet, and the structure was simple. There was also a high chance that there would not be monsters. That was because if something lived in this small cave, then there should be a slight ringing or sound, or even vibrations. That meant that there might be something different hidden within the dungeon. Our guy was impressed that the guide could tell all of this before even properly searching the dungeon. He was not an experienced guide for nothing, and he pointed out that he had been in the dungeon business for many years now. All that the Necromancer had to do was follow him, and they should try to find the exit for now, as ordered. They were moving in the opposite direction from the other hunters, but the white-haired Necromancer figured that it should be fine. So, they stepped forward and kept going when someone suddenly said that they were anxious. It was the guide, and a heavy sweat had formed on his brow. There were no traps, no hints, no nothing, and they had been roaming the dungeon for quite a while now. It was concerning to the guide, and he asked our guy if his body was feeling heavy or if it was just him. The Necromancer admitted that he did have the chills, and he asked the guide if he was sure that they should keep going. The guide was not sure, as this was the first time that he was feeling this way as well. It was a little difficult. Even meeting an ranker did not make the guide feel like this, and the Necromancer was shocked to hear that. It felt like there was some sort of ridiculously powerful being down in the dungeons, and just thinking of that was making the guide feel nervous. Ding-hoon was a necromancer, so the guide said that he should summon something for now. If the situation came down to it, he should be able to save himself at least. Meanwhile, said necromancer was high-key panicking because he was just newly a D-class necromancer and he tightened his hold on his staff. The necromancer raised his staff and his adventurer's group of skeletons popped out. He summoned Bonehead 1 to 5 to assist him just in case things got wicked. His current energy level was 50 out of 100 for summoning all 5 at once, but he feared that he might need them. The guide was curious that he summoned skeletons and asked if the necromancer could summon anything better than skeletons when this was genuinely the best that he could do. He even said so because he could not kill himself over his limited skill. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise and all the skeletons braced up with their weapons at the ready. The necromancer panicked and asked the guide what was going on. The guide groaned as they all raised their arms to cover their faces, and he told our guy to keep walking as there was an open area ahead. Ding-hoon asked what the difference was if they reached the open area, and the guide snapped that he did not know, but he did feel the presence of several beings, and if someone was there then that meant it was habitable. It was a pretty good guess, but our guy was more worried about the presence that the guide talked about. The guide himself was not sure about it and said that it could be the previous tea or it could be monsters. At any rate, they could not just stick around to find out and they needed to move. So, they did move. The 2 hunters and the 5 skeletons hurried along as they marched forward, and the MC groaned that he could not even keep his eyes and mouth open. He was stumbling through the cavern with great difficulty, and the skeleton mage activated some magic and used the air shield, because our guy was really struggling. However, much to the shock of the skeleton mage, the air shield instantly shattered and the necromancer was left again with no protection. They were facing a seriously dangerous foe. Ding-hoon coughed out blood from the shock of it and cursed at Boney for being so bad at his one job. The pressure within the cave was enough to shatter a D-rank skill the moment it was cast. The skeleton was kind enough to try to support him and the MC was shocked to see just how far ahead the guide had already gone. At this rate, he would get left behind. None of the situations he found himself in made any sense, and a newly appeared dungeon in Paju turned out to be a super high difficulty dungeon that made even a high ranker feel tense. The necromancer so desperately wanted to live and becoming a ranker was just a dream and he needed to survive first to be able to achieve that dream. His shaky, stumbly legs pressed forward through the thick of the pressure. He was gasping and panting for breath with every step that he took with 2 skeletons underneath his arm, supporting him as he raced forward. He got a notification that he had reached the stage of an elderly man filled with resentment. It was such a stupid notification and he wondered what on earth that meant for him now. The stage of an elderly man with white hair filled with deep resentment was also oddly specific. His resume was apparently so deep that icy frost formed in his hair, and they had to enter the room and defeat this old man. Our guy then realized that this elderly man must be the boss of the dungeon, and he heard someone call out. Ding-hoon turned in surprise to see some people crouched nearby. It was a small group that rejoiced at finally seeing hunters inside, and they asked if the necromancer and the guide were part of the reinforcement team. They were surprised and wondered if these were the hunters who tried to avoid the pressure and reach this place. They were glad to see a purple rank badge on the guide, and the skeletons meant that the Mick was a necromancer, so they were sure that the two were part of a rescue team. They begged to be saved and to be helped to find a way out of there. They desperately needed food or water as well as they were so thirsty. The guide sighed and figured they might as well distribute the emergency food first. Ding-hoon got busy doing that, but he was also slightly resentful about the guide running forward and saving himself when they'd been struggling under pressure a few seconds ago. He understood that was how dungeons worked, but the harsh reality of it still sucked. At any rate, he got out the emergency rations and the water. The people happily drank water and they settled to eat the rations with joy. One wrong decision and our guy could have very easily ended up like these desperate people who got stuck in a dungeon. It was all very unfortunate. Now, the guide reminded the people they had rescued to please eat slowly, and he asked them to explain what had happened to them when they got to the dungeon. The guy who had agreed to them would speak on behalf of his team. He was the B-rank hunter of the group, and among the survivors there he was of the highest rank. This place was hell and he had been a hunter for some time, but he had never encountered such a strange dungeon. The strange part was what the guide wanted to hear more about. Look, there was no exit, and the hunters were stuck. The guide had to admit that was true, and from the starting point, no matter which direction they went, the cursed cave would always bring them to this door that housed the resentful old man. Then, they were tightly bound by the heavy aura and pressure, unable to leave. Ultimately, all they could do here was to challenge what was behind that door and nothing else. However, the clear condition was insane, and the hunters did not think it was possible for anyone to defeat that thing. An elderly man with white hair filled with deep resentment. That guy was insane and they thought that it was impossible to beat him. Whether it was a D rank, C rank, or even a B rank, they were like infants before that old man. However, if it was a high rank hunter, they were sure that the real thing could be different. Surely, they could get them out of this hell. However, the guide was speechless when faced with the happily sparkling rescue victims. However, Ding-hoon wanted to ask a question. If the boss was as strong as they said, then how come the 3 of them were still alive? It was a good question, and the B ranker smirked, saying that surprisingly, the old man did not kill people. He simply accepted challengers. The old man also conducted a sort of test. They were curious about the test, but the B ranker did not know the exact details. The old man just subdued them really painfully, agonizingly, and then clicked his tongue saying that they were not fit. Then, he would throw them back out. The Necromancer was surprised to hear about a boss that did not kill, and he wondered what kind of dungeon this was. It was a little strange right then, and now that he thought about it, an old man meant that there was an old person there, so that meant that the boss they were fighting was still a person. It was the first time a dungeon boss had been human since the world changed, and our guy was very curious about that. A human boss. He did not think such a thing was even possible. This was the first time a dungeon boss was human since the world had changed, and everybody was shocked to hear this. A human dungeon boss was something that they did not even think was possible. Whatever the case was, they had to open that door and complete the mission to find an exit. However, he did not trust Kang Sunwook for this particular mission since he was a hunter that was specialized in guiding. The Necromancer wondered how they should handle this situation when someone suddenly called Mr. Kang. It was the high-rank hunters, and they asked what they were doing here. The lady hummed thoughtfully as they all shared the information that they had gathered so far. She thought that they should go in right away. Judging by the auras, the survivors were not doppelgangers or traps. It did bother her though that the aura they could feel coming from the boss's room was so intense. However, they could not just sit around and wait for things to escalate. The survivors rejoiced at seeing such a talented and confident S-rank hunter celebrating their salvation and saying that they were moved. They recognized the Dark Empress from the Pairing Guild, and from now on they would be sure to bow toward the Pairing Guild headquarters every morning. Porters and survivors were asked to stay outside while the S and A-ranked hunters took care of the situation. Indeed, an S-ranker stood in a completely different realm from an high-ranker, and not only was the Dark Empress an S-ranker, but she was also ranked among the top 1,000 high-rankers. She tied up her hair in preparation to get serious, and she told everyone that it was time to go and that they should prepare themselves. So, she grabbed a hold of the door and it opened with the high-ranked hunters stepping inside and preparing to do battle. The door closed behind them and Ding-Hun took a seat outside, chilling and waiting for the battle to be done. There was a loud scream from inside of the room which greatly surprised the Necromancer. Suddenly, the door was tossed open and both the rankers were tossed outside like trash. The redhead was even screaming about how much pain he was in. The talented lady followed soon after and was thrown out as well. She flew out of the room and her back hit the wall. She groaned in pain and gritted her teeth. The door then very carefully slid closed and Ding-Hun could not help but gape in shock and disbelief at the outcome of that match. It had not even been 10 minutes since the talented hunters went inside. For an S-rank to be incapacitated this quickly, that meant the boss they were facing within was great. The S-ranker was furious too, growling in rage about getting called not fit. She called for the porter and our guy answered immediately. She asked for an advanced level potion from his back because she was going back in. He could not believe what she was saying, but it was a determination that he found burning in her eyes. She still wanted to go in after getting beaten up like that. He asked if she was sure, and she said the survivors were right. The old man would not kill her and would only subdue her painfully. So, the Ma gave the skilled fighter the healing potion which she accepted gratefully. She was determined now and she had to let that old man know. Then, he would see if she truly was not fit. Ding-Hun had no idea what she was talking about and thought that particular phrasing was used when a master was seeking a disciple to train. If that was the case, then the old man's resentment could possibly be from not finding a suitable disciple with the talents that he was searching for. The S-rank fighter drank up the healing potion and she was fired up once more to try again. So it was that Gisoil's infinite challenge began and she strode back into the chamber. She got tossed out almost as fast too. However, that did not discourage her and she walked in again, just to get tossed out again. It soon became a fast repeating cycle of the hunter walking in and getting tossed out with even more bruises than before. Her determination was unbending, but her bravery was almost becoming foolish. One could not blame her for trying though, as they could not escape without defeating the boss. The hunter lay on the floor panting for breath after getting kicked out once again. Then she raised her head and claimed that the situation was so darn infuriating. She wondered just what the guy's problem was and what he wanted from her. That horrid cheeky old man. She had thought that he only mastered swordsmanship, but apparently, he was also good with a spear. However, she refused to give up and she was on her feet again, growling that they would see who would win between the two of them. Our guy watched her determination as she walked in and got tossed out for what seemed like the 100th time. An entire day passed with that repeated madness and even her will bent a little. Ding-Hun was exhausted just sitting there waiting for her to beat the boss, but that was not even the end of that nightmare. The second day passed, and then the third, and then the fourth day passed as well. Gisoil did not stop challenging and going mad in the process. At some point, she screamed in hatred and pointed at the door in a rage. She had no idea what the old man's deal was. He could use magic too. She could not see how anyone could clear this. This situation was big trouble. Even if Jipperang came to rescue her, the problem would ensue. He had a feeling that even two, no 5 rankers, might not defeat the old man. Alright, Goyle would finally admit it. The old man was strong. Really strong. However, as long as she was alive, she would keep challenging him. Ding Hun was impressed at the mindset of top rankers who refused to stop even in the face of defeat. However, he looked down at the staff in his hand. Unable to clear the dungeon, the survivors began to struggle. Moreover, our guy was frustrated too. He could not just wait there doing nothing, and come to think of it, all the hunters here had gone through that door and come back in an attempt to defeat the boss. Ding Hun was the only one who had not gone inside the house. The hunters noticed that he stood and the female hunter turned in surprise and asked what was the matter. Finally, the resident porter worked up the courage to say that he would like to try going in. The S-ranker was surprised to hear that, and that a porter wanted to enter a dungeon where even a high ranker had failed continuously. They had thought that he was just a novice necromancer that could only summon skeletons, and they were shocked to hear this from him. One of the angry S-rankers stepped forward and told the mech to act like a porter and just quietly carry his bags. He growled that he should know his place and even somehow reached for his sword for some reason. It seemed like his pride was threatened. Ding Hun started to sweat buckets watching the guy approach with violence in his eyes, and Gisoil commanded that he stop immediately. Meanwhile, she just wanted to know why our guy wanted to go in, and she asked if it was because he did not trust her. The Gisoil asked if the problem was that he did not trust her, and for some reason, all the hunters had gathered together looking rather menacing and insulted for some reason. However, that was not the issue at all. According to the original contract, he was a porter and he could not voice his opinions on dungeon exploration. He was well aware of that, so she then wondered why the porter suddenly wanted to challenge the boss. The old man said that he was looking for someone fit, and he figured that the old man's resentment might be related to finding a worthy disciple, and a worthy disciple meant potential, so they did not necessarily need to be perfect either. Put another way, it was likely that the old man was not talking about his current skill level. So, he was saying that he wanted to make the old man his master rather than defeat him. That may be the hidden clear condition, and he just wanted to test his theory. Hidden pieces were sometimes something that featured inside dungeons, and sometimes dungeons had alternative ways to clear them. A hidden piece was something the lady pondered. Assuming our guy's theory was right, then how was he planning on possibly becoming the old man's disciple? She asked if he somehow had more potential than her, and it kept getting more and more tense, with the rankers somehow taking his offer to help as a challenge to their power. He highly doubted that he would somehow overpower them, but he really wanted to try anyway. Soil pointed out that he did not deny the accusation that he thought he might have more potential than she did. Ding Hun groaned and quickly said that she had the wrong idea. She stared at him for a hot minute, and then finally he yelled out about pain. Everyone had experienced pain apart from him. Everyone else had experienced it but him. He felt like he was the odd one out here. Besides, the other fighters were taking a break right now. The S-ranker smiled. She smiled and turned away, saying that he had the look in his eyes that she had been searching for, and he was finally showing her his true colors. She had known it from the beginning, and she smiled. He asked what she was, and she smiled when she told him that he was suspicious. He had the eyes of a wolf on the prowl. So, he was after the dungeon's reward, and she suspected that he was hoping for some fortuitous encounter during the raid. Ding Hun narrowed his eyes as he reasoned that this person should be a fortune teller, not a ranker. He could not tell how she was able to read him so quickly just by looking at him. However, she swished away and gave him permission to try it. There was no other solution anyway, and she wanted a break just like he had said, so it worked well for her. Besides, she was not one to talk since she had already failed multiple times. Our dude was thrilled that he was getting a chance, but he was told that he would only be given one chance. As he could see, their emergency rations were running out and the rescue team was not coming. Meaning, they needed to clear the dungeon as soon as possible before they all starved to death. Ding Hun bowed in thanks at the opportunity that he had been provided, and the high rankers just looked away like a pair of frustrated snobs. Alright, it was finally time for the MC to show these guys just what he was made of. He stepped forward, one foot in front of the other as he reached for the door to the boss room. He could challenge this stage by opening the door, and the system asked if he wanted to open the door. So, he stepped forward and opened the door. The stage was, as said earlier, an elderly man with white hair filled with deep resentment, a resentment so deep that icy frost formed in his hair. The challenge was to defeat the old man. Our guy raised his hands to block out the bright light that suddenly flooded the area. Inside the room, smoke danced before him. Gingerly, Ding Hun stepped forward into the strange place when he suddenly felt an immense pressure fill the room. He fell to his knees and he was shocked when suddenly the old man appeared, complaining about the shabby girl that kept coming in, and now they had sent in an even more pitiful fellow. The old man's resentment was deep, and he said this one was not even worth looking at, and that he should just get rid of the MC. His eyes shone with blue light, and Ding Hun found his body filled with a lot of pain. He was now facing the memory of a cursed soul. Hidden condition achieved. This was the hidden condition for unique authority, Cursed Necromancer. Our guy's eyes widened in shock as an encounter with a cursed soul's memory activated. A necromancer ultimately commands the dead, and they have just encountered a cursed soul with strong determination. They had now acquired the skill of memory recreation, an S-rank skill. It felt like the necromancer was dreaming of having suddenly unlocked an S-rank skill of all things. He pushed himself to his feet and he was now using his S-rank skill. He could not believe that he was using the skill, and he was hesitant when he pushed to his feet. Come to think of it, the old man said that he would get rid of him, but he was not doing anything at all. This surprised the hesitant Necromancer, and the skill informed him that recreating the memory of the cursed soul master of all techniques would transport our dude shortly. Suddenly, a bright light shone and temporarily blinded our guy. He raised his hands to cover his face and stumbled forward when a drop of snow landed on his hand. He opened his eyes and was surprised to see that he had been transported to a land of snow. There was snow everywhere, and the old man, the old master, stood in the snow. He mumbled in anger, wondering why there were no suitable candidates. It was too wasteful to just leave it behind. What a meaningless life the old man lived. He had worked so hard to get to where he was right now, yet now he was told to throw it all away. Such a thing was what the old man considered unacceptable as he stared desolately at the land of falling snow. Meanwhile, Ding-hoon was busy marveling at the fact that he had been transported to another world. He looked around in awe that the other world really did exist, and this one was covered in ice and snow. Suddenly his eyes widened as he felt an intense feeling fill his head. These were the old man's emotions and memories, and the old man sighed that he had lived quite an interesting life. A swordsman, a spearman, an assassin, an archer, a mage, a buffer, a healer, and more. The old man had many things in his life. Once a person knew how to master the flow of Kai, all techniques became one. The old man who transcended any and all lived for a very long time. However, even Kai could not stop his aging. He stood in the snow contemplating how drinking cold water now felt like swallowing poison. The one light air now felt like it was crushing him and aching to kill him. It was painful, agonizing, and he was desperately thirsty. However, the old man refused to just die like that. Dying now would be too unfair, and his eyes burned with passion and life. The old man fell to his knees in great sorrow and openly lamented his very difficult time. He just wanted to find one single disciple who he could pass down his ability to. How could there be no one with enough talent? The idea of a single successor with nothing more than his meaningless greed. He just wanted a student to appear before him. The old man could not go on like this, and a tear fell from his eyes to the snow. The old man went as far as to say that he would even sell his soul as he pressed his hand into the snow. Just to leave behind his complete self, he would do anything. And he pressed his face into the snow with pain. The skill recreation had ended and our dude got transported back to the dungeon. He groaned as they landed once more in the room. Ding-hoon gasped as he opened his eyes. They were once again back in the dungeon. He looked around at the smoke in the area and he groaned as the pressure returned and he fell to his knees. The master of all techniques was now staring at him. It looked like the Necromancer had landed back in the dungeon, and the suffocating feeling had returned. However, his teeth clenched in a grin as he could now finally see some hope in his endeavors. The old man acknowledged our guy now and he asked if the young lad had the audacity to peer into his soul. Fortunately, the old man found that rather interesting. The master was now curious about the Necromancer and he responded that he did peer into his soul. He pushed to his feet as he knew that the old man was indeed looking for a disciple. If someone could inherit his vast power and knowledge, then it had to be the Necromancer. However, other than being somewhat interesting, the old man believed that Ding-hoon had nothing else of value and that he was worthless, lacking everything to contain his hardcore techniques. Our dude once again found himself forced to his knees and he groaned in pain, barely holding himself up with the staff. He shouted out to the old man, respectfully calling him elder and saying that if the old man continued like this, he would never find a disciple. He would remain a ghost forever, unable to resolve his resentment. People would remember him as a stubborn ghost filled with obstinacy and bullheadedness. The old man of course got offended and called our dude an insolent brat, and that he had spared ants like him with his boundless generosity. He wondered if he needed to break one of the porter's legs for him to come to his senses. Still, Ding-hoon begged for the old man to listen. The master had mastered every technique and the people of this world struggled to master it even in their lifetime. The old man thought that such a thing was impossible and that the world was vast and that time was long. Surely there would be another genius like him in time. However, Ding-hoon took the opportunity to point out that the woman who had come in earlier had such great potential, and that woman was one of the strongest in their world. The old man could not believe that and was genuinely shocked. Considering that a ranker like Gisoil was his ultimate goal, the old man's reaction kind of stung. The old man seemed to be contemplating everything. Anyway, the old man had at least taken the bait and then he yelled that it was impossible. He could not believe that a talented female fighter was one of the strongest when her skill level was nowhere near his. He was sure that our guy was trying to trick him. However, the Necromancer just asked the old ghost to look into his eyes, asking if those looked like the eyes of a dishonest fellow. He knew the old man could tell at once that he was not lying, and the master was shocked by this bizarre truth. He thought it was very unfortunate that things came to be like this. Then, Ding-hoon appealed to the elder, saying that if no one met his standards, then he could use him. The old man was curious about that suggestion, and the Necromancer pleaded to the old master to pass on his abilities to him. The old man asked if the Necromancer was asking to become his disciple. The old master thought of the youngster as insolent, but now he had also proven to be rather shameless and he would rather teach garbage than teach the likes of him. The old master knew his worth. However, Ding-hoon was persistent and he said that he was not asking him to teach him directly. He was not going to use any abnormalities. He opened up his unique abilities and summoned a skeleton. He summoned more than one, saying that if it was this powerful elder then surely He could see the potential of his small group of armed skeletons. The old man stared at the manifested skeletons, and our guy really hoped that the old man could see that growing skeletons would have limitless potential. With such potential, then surely it would be something too good to resist. The old master noted that all of the skeletons had different unique abilities and wielded different weapons. It would be easier for him to teach all of them. If he wanted a single successor, then he did not need to worry. Even if all of these grew, then Dinghun would be the one to inherit it all. The young man asked what the old man thought, saying that this undead improved. They don't feel pain, so they will have more endurance than anyone and be more challenging than anyone because they are fearless. The old man stayed studying the skeletons in front of him, assessing them and considering his options. He frowned with narrowed eyes and an icy gaze as he considered all the skeletons before him. Then he suddenly turned away, almost like he was dismissing them. The MC was still struggling under the pressure and he worried that the old man was still not impressed. However, the old man then said that it was amusing and ironic. The successor that he had sought was not human but undead. The potential of those skeletons was truly immense. The skeletons stood, poised for battle, and the old man noted that they must have been exceptional warriors in life. He had always wanted such disciples and only now was he gaining such. Teaching more than one was tricky, but the old man figured that he could accept such a compromise. So, he turned to our dude and the notification informed him that he had fulfilled the hidden condition. Our guy was elated as the hidden condition was fulfilled for the man filled with deep resentment. The old man decided to trust the necromancer's words. He would trust the determination in his eyes, so he asked the young man to promise him that no matter what trials came, he would inherit all that he possessed. The old master asked the Mick to promise that he would leave a mark of his new master somewhere in the world. Dinghun had finally been recognized by the master of all techniques and he struggled to say that he would not miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He would inherit the power no matter what. The master then smiled, revealing an almost kind and happy face. Our guy received congratulations and noticed that he had cleared the stage of the elderly man with white hair filled with deep resentment. When Dinghun opened his eyes again, he was indeed surprised to find himself in a place that did not look like the dungeon. He was instead lying on a bed with great confusion in his eyes and a new change of clothes. Someone greeted him, noting that he was finally awake and he turned to acknowledge them. He asked who the person was out of temporary blindness, but that long black hair was recognizable anywhere. It was of course Gisoil who seemed to be watching him with a serious expression on her face. Memories started coming back to the necromancer really quickly as he wondered where he was because it looked very much like a hospital. Then, the S-ranked hunter decided to formally introduce herself this time, saying that she was Gisoil, the vice guild master of the Parent Guild. She was also known as the Dark Empress, but he already knew all that and he was wondering what her dark self with her dark expression was doing in his room. He could not remember what happened after clearing the dungeon, and he reasoned that he must have lost consciousness. The Vice Guild Master admitted to her surprise that the boss was clearable when she had tried and failed many times. She never would have thought that a porter of all people would be the one to clear it. It was clear that fact really seemed to bother her for some reason. Her expression was clearly bothering Dinghun because he hitched his blankets high in fear like she had come to assassinate him. He asked nervously why she was staring at him like that, and Soil did him no favors because she kept glaring like he was a criminal. The necromancer went on to say that he was just curious. He had no idea why the vice guild master of a major guild would be in his hospital room in the first place. She was silent for a hot minute, and then she admitted that it should be obvious. She was really curious about what had happened there. More than anything, she wanted to know how he had cleared a dungeon that she had struggled with so much. She also wanted to know what reward he had gotten for clearing it. She asked if he had really become the old man's disciple and so on. Her questions were definitely valid. The dungeon was hers and he had only been given a single opportunity. As their emergency rations had dwindled and there was no rescue team in sight, they needed to clear the dungeon as soon as possible. From her perspective, our guy was just a random guy who came along and stole her moment. A more violent ranker might have already beheaded him for stealing their prey, even though that sounded a bit much for a well-developed society. Still, our guy was nervous and his hands curled into his blankets. Noticing this, the S-ranker asked what he was thinking so deeply about. He then said that before he answered her questions, he wanted her to tell him what the news articles were saying about the dungeon exploration since he needed to get all his facts in order. The Dark Empress acknowledged what he was worried about, but she said that there was no need for that. They reported that the Parent Guild's advance team successfully cleared the dungeon and had all the survivors sign confidential agreements. This meant that the public had no idea that Dinghun was the one to clear the dungeon, much to his relief. He bowed in thanks for her consideration of him. Then, she said that he acted more mature than he looked. Most hunters would kill for a chance to show off their achievements to the world, but he just smiled and said that his safety came first. Safety was first and safety was second. Then, there was no need to thank him. This was also a matter of pride for the Parent Guild as no one would believe that a porter was the MVP of the expedition, an E-rank mercenary no less. The necromancer fell silent at that part and noted that they were keeping it a secret since it was embarrassing. If our guy was to reveal the truth to the world, he might get discreetly dealt with. Then, he called the Dark Empress again, and she said the porter could ask any questions. Then, he asked how long he was unconscious, and she replied that it had been 3 days since he came out of the dungeon, and he could not believe how long he'd been knocked out. Still, he had gotten a fortuitous opportunity thanks to Gisoil. However, he should not babble about the rewards as that could also put him in great danger. He really appreciated her for thinking of him, but honestly, he was still not sure what was what. He had not even figured out the rewards yet. He might need some time to answer her questions properly. She was not very amused by this response, but he did beg for some time to figure things out, and she hummed in thought. It wasn't like he was going anywhere anyway, as he reminded her, since he knew that no hunter in the world could ever escape the eyes of the Dark Empress. Of all the possible titles they could have given her, that one was the most cheesy, and she seemed to think that especially when he said it. Still, she said that she appreciated it and that she would come back once he had sorted things out. The Necromancer thanked her for everything and the Dark Empress stepped out. This left him falling to the bed with a sigh of relief. Life had been pretty spectacular of late, with awakening after 3 years of nothing, meeting a rancor, and the strange dungeon on top of that. Plus, he could end up on the wrong side of pairing if he was not careful. On the other hand, he could build a nice and healthy relationship with the guild and the handsome man that ran the show. Suddenly, our guy got a notification, and he was asked to check his clear rewards. He then recalled that he had fainted and never checked the rewards. So, he got busy accepting the rewards and received a ton of them. His energy level had permanently increased by 20, and he had acquired the skill teaching of all techniques, which was S rank. He had gained yet another S rank skill and he was very happy about it. The status window popped up and he could only summon skeletons, but he did have the ability to subdue his opponents using fearsome spirits and toxic substances. He had gained 2 new S-rank skills from the new mission, and he grinned with joy, thinking that this amount of luck was incredibly insane. So, this was why the veterans were also obsessed with dungeons. He had a memory recreation which could read the memory of the dead, and our guy wondered what that could be since it looked like a hidden skill. He was glad that he could read the old man's memories thanks to this skill, but he could not say that he was impressed. Oh well, he was sure that he would find another use for it someday. So, he checked out his other fancy and shinier skills. The teaching of all techniques went into more detail and it consumed a lot of energy to summon the master of all techniques for 60 minutes. Then the master could pass on knowledge and the cooldown period was 24 hours. Only he would be able to perceive the master after he was summoned. Our guy was silent as he read through all that. Then, he suddenly hopped to his feet, grabbed his bag, and left. The little liar had said that he would never run away, but now he was in an open field that was far from the hospital. He was busy contemplating his hand and then he waved it around to summon his new master. Using skill teaching of all techniques, an S-rank skill, he summoned the huge glowing ball and with the hyper-focus, he was able to bring forth the master of all techniques. The master said that it was about time and he smiled and called our guy a brat. Calling Dinghun a brat, the young lad smiled upon seeing his master and then he got smacked on the head by the angry old man. Of course, his master had beef, because this student had promised that he would inherit everything but he was only calling him just now. They had already wasted so much time that they could have used it for training. Our dude, however, was more focused on how much that punch hurt. His new master did not care and complained that if he were that lazy, then he would not be able to keep up. Then, the Necromancer asked the cranky teacher to wait a moment. He had called the teacher as soon as he regained his senses, and besides that, the old man used to be incapable of physically influencing their world. However, now the old man was throwing around punches like it was nothing. As the old master expected, the young lad still had a long way to go. To think that his expression would be so easy to read. It was both laughable and disappointing. The master revealed that the boy was connected to him mentally. The Necromancer thought that his master should have trouble inflicting pain on other people. However, since he had been called, the master wanted to get started immediately as he did not have time for an explanation even if his student wanted them. His student sulked but he hoped to do it and got busy summoning the skeletons. However, the old master said that there was no need for that. He was going to decide first what the student was going to learn that day. He clearly understood the talent of those 10, however, the problem was the Necromancer himself. Dinghun was shocked to hear this, and he grappled internally wondering why he was the problem and if the old man intended to teach him too. The old man did indeed intend to do so, and he asked the young lad if he understood why he was called the master of all techniques. He was given that very fancy nickname after learning and perfecting countless talents. He wielded many deadly weapons with expertise and was renowned far and wide. The Necromancer really thought that the old man had only 10 things to teach. It was laughable. Everything outside of that 10 was up to the young lad to learn. And the old man smiled wickedly. The young lad was shocked to hear this and he wanted to post. He complained that his talent was trash but the old man coughed loudly, slamming his foot on the floor. He demanded silence from his annoying student, saying that since the young lad had made that promise with him, then he just had to inherit his mastery. If the young lad could not achieve that, then he would just have to try until he could. The old man could use one of his arts to make trash comparable to a genius, the trash in question being our guy. It was a good thing that the old man could exercise physical influence on him too because he had a good mind to beat his student senseless for every failure. The whole situation was very fortunate for the old man. There were some arts that he created but he had never gotten the chance to use them. Hardened meridians can be opened with Kai, and Ding-hoon's physique should improve if massages for 300 days. It would be painful, but he had noticed that the young lad was quite tenacious, so he dismissively believed that his young student would be fine. The Necromancer did not share the positivity at all. He looked quite ill as he tried to remind his new teacher that he was totally still human here. He was the one who owned the body, so he had no idea why the old man was happily making guesses. The Necromancer did not feel like his heart was ready for such intense training. He had only come out of the hospital. The old man of course did not care and yelled for his student to be quiet. He asked if our guy even knew how many had wanted and begged to learn from the old master in the world that he was from. He was going to pass down the grand technique of the celestial artisan. It was the art that he created in his last years after thinking much about it. Ding-hoon wondered why the old man had never used such a technique if he had it. After all, it was a technique that could turn trash into genius. The old master could clearly see what his student was thinking. However, for this technique, the old master would need to use his life energy as payment. It would be a great sacrifice to change a boneless disciple and to increase their talent. However, after doing such an incredible feat, the master's body would have melted and disappeared. The young lad then asked how things were different now, and the master shrugged that he was already dead, so it probably would be okay. It was a very comfortable way of thinking and it did not really affect our guy, so he went along with it. Then, the young Necromancer asked his new teacher why he had not just taken any of the others who had tried to challenge him and used that technique on them, since he had also been dead in the dungeon. Of course, the old man responded to that question with a very violent punch. Ding-hoon groaned, asking why he had gotten hit this time. The old man glared, saying that even when he told the young lady something, he did not properly understand its meaning. The old man had already said that the technique was the kind to turn trash into genius. It would have no meaning if it was not used on trash. So, the old man stylishly reminded our dude that he belonged in a garbage can, as he explained that the technique was only useful if the target was at the level of food waste. Ding-hoon was of course offended by this very blatant and downright rude conclusion. No one wanted to get called food waste of all things. The technique would not work on people who were not at a high level. After all, their bodies had already been influenced by other energies. Compared to all-powerful people like Goyle, the Necromancer's body was very clean and very weak. Although he had the ability to summon the dead, that did not change his body much. He was the perfect vessel. Not only that, but this was only the second best way. After all, born geniuses were more impressive than fabricated ones. The man had originally intended to find a more impressive prospect than our guy. The student pondered all he had heard, and although the master's words were harsh, he recognized that they were good words nonetheless. If it was not just the skeletons, if there was a chance that Ding-hoon could also get stronger, then he was willing to take it. It was like killing two birds with one stone. The old master grinned and asked if he was ready. Of course, the Necromancer was more than ready to absorb any power that anyone would throw his way. A few moments later there was a scream of total agony that sent the birds soaring into the air. The previously confident student now found himself begging on his hands and knees for his master to wait a moment as he was now in so much pain. The master was not having it, of course, asking his student why he was making such a fuss when they had barely even started yet. He smacked the Necromancer more, and our guy reasoned that he had to endure this abuse if he wanted to become a high ranker. However, the abuse was surely intense and the MC was sweating buckets from the assaults from his master. He began to realize that this harsh and barely bearable training was just the beginning. His master praised his posture, saying that as he expected, his student had guts. This was great and the master told his student to prepare since he was going to increase his pace. His student grunted in pain protest but ensured not to move. Ding-hoon had to endure and he gritted his teeth in pain as he recited that mantra in his head. His system got a notification that he had obtained a skill that was C rank in pain resistance. It was also a skill that had the potential for further growth, which was great. Our guy endured the pain as he got his back blown out by the old master. By the time the old man stopped, the poor Necromancer fell to the floor in pained exhaustion. The old man was proud of his student, saying that was it or the grand technique, and the Necromancer had done a good job just enduring that. The old master was glad that Ding-hoon could endure a lot despite being trash. The poor Necromancer was still trying to pull his soul back to his body as his master went on talking, saying that if his student had the desire to become strong and have the mental strength and persistence to endure that, then he was not a lost cause. Then, the student shakily asked if this meant that they were done for the day. Much to his horror, his master informed him that they had 30 minutes left in training time. The Necromancer was of course horrified to hear this, but his master easily picked him up. Ding-hoon was asked to stand, his master scolding him for thinking he would only get to enjoy a massage for the day. The undead were over there fighting for their training to begin as well. Tears gathered in the poor student's eyes and he sobbed in acknowledgement that he still had training to do, even though he really just wanted to die. The foundation of all professions was physical strength, and it seemed like these skeletons could build physical strength even without muscles. Well then, the first thing they had to start with was proper posture. The old man struck a fighting pose and informed his student that it was the horse riding stance that he frequently used throughout his life. Human muscles are concentrated in the lower body, making a solid base the key to building strength and stability. The skeletons also struck a pose, but to be honest, the poor necromancer was struggling with it. The old man had just beaten the life force out of him, and now he wanted him to stand in that posture. The old master went on to say that he had mentioned already that his student had no talent. Ding-hun trembled as his master approached, and the old man noted that his student's one positive trait remained his tenacity. Moreover, the master should not be weaker than their summon begins, and the poor necromancer huffed and puffed, knowing all this, which was why he was trying his best to endure this old man. His muscles were already toned and could not recover from all the pounding that he had endured earlier. So, what was the point of this training? It felt like nothing but pure torture, unprovoked torture to the poor necromancer. He was panting and gasping for breath. It took a nice long while before he could finally collapse to the floor in great relief that at least the torture had stopped. The master said that was fine and they could wrap it up for that day. Of course, he expected his student to perform that physical training every morning and to not even think of summoning him if he had failed to be consistent. The exhausted Ding-hun agreed. The duration of the skill teaching had ended and the master solemnly disappeared. Fortunately for our guy, the skull could only be used again after 24 hours. The necromants collapsed in relief when the master of all techniques was finally unsummoned. The skeletons watched their master curiously and the exhausted lad called out to his bony friends. They stared at him and nodded in response to his call. Then, he apologized and asked if they would be so kind as to carry their poor exhausted master. Forget about walking. The poor lad could not even stand on his own feet. Later, he reached out and opened a door. As he walked in, the necromancer was surprised when someone called his name. It was his old boss and he happily waved the necromancer over, happy to see that he had finally returned. Then, the necromancer was asked if he recognized two random guys who happened to be standing around. They were apparently one of the teams from the past dungeon's survivors, and our guy instantly remembered them. He was surprised to see them and the two guys approached, happy to see the necromancer as they asked how he had been. They were also surprised to see that he had changed quite a bit and he even looked more muscular and even better looking. Ding-hun could not help but blush at the compliment. After all, he had indeed bulked up a little after some hardcore training. Suddenly getting tortured by his master did not seem so bad. His shoulders had also grown broader and it was like his skeletal structure had changed. He wondered if this was really the result of the 30-minute massage that he had endured from his very relentless and merciless master. At any rate, our guy then wondered why these guys had come here to find him. He asked what brought them there and one of the men chuckled. He apologized for introducing himself so late, and said it was nice to meet the necromancer. Formally, he introduced himself as Kang Yeho, a C-rank hunter. Ding-hun's actions and attitude back then left an impression on the C-ranker. Since they had made it out alive, he had marked the necromancer down as someone to team up with. So, the C-ranker had come to do just that and they shook hands. The necromancer politely greeted Yeho and also introduced himself as just an E-rank necromancer mercenary. Then, to get right to the point, the C-ranker informed our guy that there was another dungeon, which came as a genuine surprise. It turned out that it was a well-known C-rank type dungeon and they wanted to hire the talented necromancer for the job. They had heard that the necromancer was struggling financially and would accept any job, and our guy was shocked to hear that news of his poverty was spreading far and wide. He glared at his boss who had sort of hyped him up cause he knew Ding-hun could use some good deals after getting knocked out cold for so long. Still, the MC could not believe that his boss sweet-talked the hunters so that he could sell his guy out and secure the job. Well, it was indeed true that the MC needed the money. This news pleased Yeho, who excitedly added that the dungeon was a tricky one for a C rank. Still, it was worth a try. With some luck, the rewards would be pretty good. Recently, they had heard that a party got a power potion, which was huge news around this part. It turns out that a power option was a rare reward from dungeons, regardless of rank. It was a high-level potion known to cure any curse or illness. The new C-ranker knew that such a job was very appealing to our guy, and this time, he would not be a porter but a member. Then, Ding-hun asked about the payment but the C-ranker just laughed that the MC was not a porter, so of course he would be getting a fair share of their profit. This further surprised the main character as he had been doing trash jobs back-to-back for a really long time. If a power potion were to actually drop, its average price would be about 50 million won. Divided among 6 people, that would roughly be estimated to be 8.3 million won each. Just thinking about that had our dude imagining a shower of money and he really enjoyed that picture. The C-ranker asked if such a deal was appealing to our guy, and he took a moment to consider the offer. Then, he agreed, saying that he was tired of being a porter anyway. He had been curious to see the power of his evolved skeletons in action, so this was a good chance for it. Since it was agreed, Ding-hun was asked to come to a particular location by next Monday. The young lad was elated and said that he looked forward to working with them. The sun shone brightly in the sky as someone mumbled about a dungeon. Yes, for some reason, while the skeletons trained and honed their skills, our guy explained that the hunters in his world grew stronger through those dungeons. The old man found such an idea rather laughable, saying that a novice who had not even mastered the basics was already running around, trying to run before he could walk. Ding-hun begged the old man to please understand that he also needed to earn a living too. So, the old man said that it was not too bad, and he preferred practical experience over studying at a desk anyway. Thus, Ding-hun beamed at being granted permission to participate, like a child begging their mother. However, the old master had one condition. He would not tolerate Ding-hun using such endeavors as an excuse to skip out on training. The old man was of course disgusted by his student's answering squeak, demanding the meaning behind such a reaction and if his student wanted to slack off. The old man knew he could be summoned inside dungeons as well, so there was no time, and they had to start the massage again that morning. Ding-hun was of course horrified, thinking it was too soon to start their daily pounding. However, his master was having none of it and they got right into pounding in the woods with great ferocity. The Necromancer groaned heavily as he gripped his shoulder in pain. His body was trembling as the old master announced that they had trained enough for the day, and he congratulated his student on his good job. Once again, our guy collapsed to the ground, though this time he managed to catch himself on one knee, so that was a great improvement. Ding-hun was panting for breath and he mentally thought that he had almost died once again. The new skill that he had acquired when he received that message, if it were not for that pain-resistant skill, he would for sure already be dead. Thankfully for the low-ranking student, the skill still had the potential to grow. His master was proud, as usual, of his student's ability to endure. He clapped happily and the poor student could only groan that it was all thanks to his hard-working master. The old man was proud, and he thought that they could raise the intensity of the training a bit, starting the next day. Of course, our guy was not happy to hear this. He did not even know it was possible to raise the intensity of an already intense training. The old man ignored him of course and said that it was time for them to start their proper training. The teacher commanded for everyone from humans to skeletons to gather around. The skeletons quickly marched over as they were to come over to resume a squatting position just like last time. From then on, while they were training the constitution, the old master would teach each of them a technique every day. He then asked who wanted to go first. Ding-hun was interested to hear of a technique, so the old man elaborated. The skeleton with the sword for instance and pointed at it. Much to both his students' surprise, the skeleton was a swordsman, and it did not have a skill. All that it really did was swing its sword around any time there was danger. That was fine. However, as for the skill, they could develop that as they went on. So, the old man asked the bone soldier to go ahead and see that sword. The skeleton was shocked to hear this, and he looked to the MC, but the necromancer assured the skeleton that it was fine since the old man would make it the greatest swordsman. This was great news to the skeleton, though our guy reminded it that it would need to train to the point where its bones would break. This news of course made the skeleton second think about the whole situation. However, it was too late to back out now and the day went on. The skeleton swung the mighty sword, cutting through the elements with power and precision. Then, the old man called our guy, asking if his name was Ding-hun. Of course that was his name, and he told the elder as much. Then, the elder asked his student what he thought swordsmanship was. The student thought about it and said that since it was called swordsmanship, then he assumed that it was a technique that used a sword. A very straightforward and to the point definition. Well, it was a very simple way of thinking, just as the old man had expected. The student groaned, but the old man reassured him that he was right. There was no need to overthink swordsmanship. It was simply the skill of handling a sword, that was all. Nothing more and nothing less. Then, the old man asked the guy to pick up the stick and he tossed it to the MC. The student could now sort of understand what was going on. The old man not only wanted the skeletons to inherit all techniques, but he wanted Ding-hun to inherit them as well. So, our guy picked up the stick and the old man asked him to wield it. The young student was perplexed and asked how he was supposed to wield it. The old man had already told him not to overthink it. He wanted to see his student in action immediately. He had to hold it in whatever way felt the most comfortable and wield the stick. So, our guy swung the stick and the old master asked if he had wielded it. The student nervously said yes. Then, the old man asked him to wing it as hard as he could. Immediately the student complied and he swung that sword with all the power that he could. He was not sure if he was doing it right, however, he was congratulated for his effort. However, this confused the necromancer as he had barely done anything and he questioned the credibility of his instructor. Then, the teacher asked him to look again at the grip of his right hand, and how it was. The thumb was firmly raised and the other 4 fingers were holding it in place. Besides, his swing posture was also rather unsightly, and our guy swung once from the 10 o'clock position to 4 o'clock. Then again, he swung from 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock. The old man had not taught him anything yet, but the young lad swung the way he thought was most comfortable for a slash. Thus, Ding-hun's perception of slash was based on everything he had experienced throughout his life. The necromancer had just put his life into that swing that he had displayed, and the young lad was in awe as he stared and marveled at the stick in his hand. Then, the old man asked him a question, and asked if he added strength and speed to the slash that he just performed, if that would make the slash powerful. Our guy was stunned speechless and his master complained that he was making that stupid and flabbergasted face again. Any slash would become powerful with strength and speed, and it was a very simple fact, one that would mean change even if the world were to end. Our guy stared at the stick in realization, and he could see what the old man meant. The man wanted him to create his very own slash and then add strength and speed to it. It looked like the student was starting to understand now. The mech admitted he was understanding a little, so the teacher asked if he knew what would happen if his slash was repeated millions of times and reached its peak. The old man picked up his sword and asked the slow MC to watch closely since this was the swordsmanship that he and the skeleton would learn. Striking a very cool pose, the old man swung his sword, and the young lad marveled as the sword cut through the wind in a beautiful and powerful slash. The old master displayed a dance of elegance and swordsmanship as he spun around the field that they stood in, proudly swinging his mighty sword. The power and might of each swing and slash were amazing, slicing through the air like it was a living, breathing creature. There was no need for theoretical discussions, and all the young student really needed to do was to strengthen his swing and his slash. Once that was done, then everyone would eventually use his slash as the standard. Ding-Hun was speechless in awe, so it was okay if his posture was awkward, and no one cared if he swung his sword a little differently. The most important thing was that it was his swing, and he could swing it however he liked. So, Ding-Hun swung his sword with all his might and he acquired the C-rank skill, Rend, which had the potential for further growth. There was a lot of writing involved, and a very beautiful dark-haired man appeared. This man was gorgeous, and most importantly, he was not the main character. Someone called this beautiful man brother, and he was, of course, the guild master of the Pairing Guild, ranked 58 in the world. His name was Jipperang, the fine beau, and indeed, he was fine. The man in question looked up to acknowledge his beautiful sister Soil, and she looked upset about something. Being the stellar big brother that he was, he asked her what was the matter since it was the first time that she had come to see him. It turned out that she had been worried about something recently, and she needed to discuss it with him. The problem was that she wanted to know if a D-rank hunter could suddenly exhibit strength beyond that of a high ranker. Of course, that sort of thing was ridiculous and her brother found it such an odd question indeed. However, the little sister did not care and she just wanted an answer. So, big brother got to it. Usually, even with getting a fortuitous opportunity, or learning a skill, it would take a great amount of time to master a great skill, so the idea was very unlikely. However, if such a case existed, the only explanation would be that they had been hiding their ability. Soil was 100% convinced that our guy was definitely hiding his ability. Alright, her brother decided to believe her since even rankers could not hide their abilities from her eyes. The Dark Empress had an S-rank search ability and it was mainly undefeated. Nothing could be hidden from her. So, it did not really make sense to her handsome bro why she would ask such a question and he asked if something was going on. The young lady hesitated as she was yet to make a report to her brother about the bizarre happening in the dungeon that she visited. This was because she could not bear to tell him that she had been defeated over and over again by a cranky old man. Even if he was a powerful old man, he was still old and a huge pain in the behind. No one had ever made the talented huntress feel so powerless before. She grits her teeth as she cannot fathom how a D-rank hunter of all things could have possibly been that level. Certainly, Ding-Hun's first impression was out of the ordinary, and she had been curious about him, which was why she had given him a chance. However, she could not believe that Porter Boy had actually cleared the dungeon. He had promised to tell her about how he'd done it once things were sorted out, so she would have to wait for now. Meanwhile, her brother was watching her monologue in silence and he wondered what that was all about as she was acting very suspicious. She had a serious face earlier but now she was suddenly smiling. He wondered what was up with that. She was making him rather curious, especially since his little girl had never cared about anything but wielding her dagger. She had a serious blush on her face now and she mumbled that it was nothing like that. Having gotten the answer to her questions, she would be leaving now. Her brother cooed after her, telling her not to be shy and to let her brother know what was going on. Of course, she was not having it and made a beeline out of there, yelling like she had no interest. Meanwhile, inside a forest, some suspicious-looking guys had opened up a portal. It was of course our guy and his new team members, and the team beamed once the portal was open. They happily greeted the Necromancer as soon as he showed up and told him to get over there. He had shown up just as he had promised, which was nice since they had sent the dungeon details via text. The team was sure that he had checked them on the way and the Necromancer gave the affirmative on that. The dungeon was C-rank and it was a desert field type. The main mission there was to eliminate monsters and defeat the boss. It was a very basic and typical dungeon. As the C-ranker had earlier mentioned, the Necromancer had slathered on some sunscreen and packed some emergency ice water to help him face the desert. The C-ranker was proud of the MC for thinking ahead. Suddenly, Ding-Hun realized something was off and he thought there were more people gathered than the C-ranker had mentioned before. He wondered who the two new girls were while they were busy checking out the dungeon gate. They would see the desert once they passed it, and the C-ranker informed our guy that he had invited 2 F-rank porters this time, which seemed highly irresponsible and dangerous for a desert C-rank dungeon. The C-ranker insisted that there was no need to worry since he had already paid them, so our guy would not be charged in addition. The Necromancer was grateful about that and the whole thing made sense to him. See, to pick up the ore and items dropped in the dungeons, they needed porters. A C-rank dungeon was a little tricky, but he was sure that everything would work out in the end. After all, his skeletons could defeat an orc, the highest D-rank monster, in an instant. So, his teammates stepped through the fancy shining portal and our guys did the same. The bright light signaling their transport to another world. The bright and hot sun shone harshly down on the desert sand and they had entered the dungeon, which was of course desert-themed. They were exposed to a harsh environment as they trudged within, and the hot sun seemed to double in intensity as soon as it noticed them. All of the Necromancer's stats were then decreased by 10% from the harsh weather. It was the worst. The dungeon was a lot hotter than the hunters had expected, but they had to endure it and think of it as enjoying a sauna. However, that was easier said than done, and they wondered if that was even possible. Meanwhile, the Necromancer was busy wondering if the sun was truly that bad, as it just so happened to be bearable for him. Standing under the sun for a few hours was child's play, especially compared to the hellish massage that he had to receive daily from his sadistic old master. Our guy then used his D-rank skeleton skill to summon a nice collection of skeletons. The bony with the shield marched forward and sunk his shield into the floor. The other adventurers looked rather alarmed to see the bony skeletons suddenly appear. One of the hunters gasped, feeling rather impressed with our guy's ability. Even better was that the bones seemed even stronger than the last time they'd met. Ding-Hun just laughed it off, and the ringleader eventually clapped his hands and reminded everyone to focus. The types of monsters here were scorpions and snakes. The team was not so happy to hear that they had snakes here, and the ringleader reminded them not to be scared of mere sea rankers. All the hunters needed to do was follow them closely. The porters were to pick up what they were told and to pass what they were told. Their job was very simple and very straightforward, and they understood. The skeletons marched forward as well, and everyone began the very hot journey through the desert as the hot sun worked very hard to deplete every one of their energies. It was so hot that the other adventurers could not take it anymore and wondered how much longer they had to keep walking. Then, the ringleader brought them to a halt and everyone stared at their very sandy location. The other hunters saw nothing in front of them and were confused about why they had stopped. Suddenly there was a huge shake and quake that had the place bouncing. With great alarm, the hunters watched a monster rise from the dirt. It was of course a batch of giant scorpion monsters, the very terrifying kind, and they cried out in surprise. However, someone seized a dagger and made quick work of the monsters that had appeared, slicing and dicing them. It was the sea ranker, and he was not scared of a few scorpion monsters. He yelled at everyone to get their shit together, as this was just the first foe they faced for the day, and this was really not the time to be slacking off. They had to get into battle formation and get ready. The other hunters snapped back into gear and were ready to get to business. They each quickly took up their battle stances and rushed to fight the scorpions, whipping out their weapons. C-rank desert scorpions sure were formidable, and Ding-Hun watched from a safe distance, a thing that the scorpion did not see as strong as the orc that he had faced in the training grounds. He then turned to Bony 5 and had the mage use its air shield on him. The shield was quickly erected, and then the Necromancer called to the rest of the boneheads. Lifting his necromancy staff, he informed his skeletal warriors that they should charge the enemy and wipe them out. Now that our guy had secured his safety, he could have his almighty bony warriors charge at the monsters in front of him without any remorse. The Bonehead 4 used the skill, the low-level taunt with its shield, and the Necromancer ordered his skeletal warriors to march onward and do his dirty work. The desert scorpions then quickly took notice of our guy as his mighty warriors, specifically Bonehead 4. Bonehead 4 was not even slightly intimidated, and Bonehead 1 waved its mighty sword at its enemies. With a clang, the sword was brought down on a scorpion. However, the sword quickly got knocked away. Although the sword could not pierce the defense of the scorpion's hard outer shell, the attack did seem to be working, and our guy commanded his warriors to keep fighting. If they kept hitting the scorpions, then the scorpions would eventually collapse. So, the skeletons charged forward and did exactly as they had been told to do. This was nightmare fuel for the Scorpion Alliance as the onslaught from the skeletal soldiers continued without mercy, and the scorpions squeaked in fear. This feeling of watching his skeleton soldiers tear the enemy apart felt really good. It was going much smoother than he had expected it to, and he could not help but smile. His C-rank teammate came over to praise the Necromancer and his skeletons. It seemed the MC had gotten a fortuitous encounter. However, the Necromancer tried to dismiss the praise, saying that he was able to do this because the ringleader and the others had already dealt with the largest group first. The C-ranker laughed that our guy had no reason to be so humble, and wondered if having a fortuitous encounter improved a person's personality. The Necromancer was pleased to be viewed favorably. However, anyway, he could not help but be wary of just how much his new teammate said the word fortuitous. It was mighty suspicious. On top of that, the other hunters were still bravely fighting against the scorpions, and Ding-Hun could see that they were all quite strong. He did not feel at all like this group needed to bring an E-rank hunter as a mercenary. They knew he was the one to receive the reward from the high difficulty dungeon, so things were starting to feel like a setup around these parts. However, because of the confidentiality contract with pairing, they could not openly talk or ask him about it. They had only one way to answer their questions, and that was likely by watching him in action through dungeon exploration. There was no camera to watch, and there would be no traces left behind of whatever was done inside of a dungeon. It was not rare for accidents to occur inside of a dungeon, and all the other guys were now watching him with suspicious looks in their eyes. There was no doubt about it, Ding-Hun was in danger. For now, he would stick to being careful, as it was only a suspicion with no proof. So, the Necromancer continued forward, oblivious to the ringleader watching his behind with a very evil look on his face. The expedition through the dungeon ruins continued, and they got to a nice half-broken construction of crumbling stairs. They had reached the ancient Desert Scorpion King, and to break the seal of the ancient Desert Scorpion King, a sacrifice was needed. That couldn't be good. They were asked to place 2 offerings atop the altar, and the offerings had to be living F rank or higher hunters. Now, the 2 girls were absolutely horrified as they slowly realized why they might have been hired, and the plot had taken a downright sinister turn. Even the Necromancer was speechless to hear that they would need to offer up F ranks within the dungeon. There had been no mention of this when they'd invited him for the job, and suddenly someone hummed mockingly about how it was so strange that they needed to make offerings. The other sleazy hunters were laughing and asking each other how such a thing could come up when they clearly already had prior knowledge about this. They were the absolute worst as they wondered aloud how they could find any offerings in the middle of the desert. Then, all smiling wickedly, they turned their attention to the 2 porter girls who stared at the men in horror. One of the girls called out to the party leader, asking what was the meaning of their new situation. However, the party leader went on with his evil smile, asking if the girls had not heard about how they needed to present 2 offerings. They needed 2 living hunters who were F rank or higher so that they could continue their journey. It was an easy enough message to understand. It was also downright cruel, especially when he asked the 2 girls to offer themselves up willingly. They were horrified of course and asked the crazy hunters if they were out of their minds. The Cray ringleader pretended like he was pondering the accusation. Then, he said he would accept that if thinking that way would make the girls feel more comfortable, then they were free to do so. It was a terrible situation and they demanded why they would be treated in such a way, like they were disposable. They did not want to believe that the leader had always intended for this to happen, but his evil chuckle told them all that they needed to know. He was absolutely despicable, and he asked if they had not at least found it strange as he pulled out his dagger. He had paid the girls higher than usual and that they were such trash that they should have asked why anyone would use them. If they wanted to receive high pay, then they needed to pay a high price, and he was wickedly going to sacrifice them for his own gain. To the ringleader, that was just common sense. Meanwhile, Ding-hoon was trying to figure out when he'd ended up the sidekick to a low-class villain because this was not what he had signed up for. The Necromancer realized that if that guy was behaving like that in front of him, then it probably meant that the ringleader felt very confident that he could easily overwhelm the MC. This irritated Ding-hoon. Meanwhile, the ringleader laughed with his dagger out and told the girls to quit resisting and to hurry up and climb the altar. Suddenly, a hand appeared before the F-rankers, and the ringleader was quite surprised to see our guy step up and defend them. He was not amused and told the Necromancer that there was no need for him to get involved though. He asked if this meant that they were going against him. It seemed that the Necromancer was purer than the ringleader had expected. He asked if he was just playing the passing hero. The Necromancer told the guy to shut up and asked what his goal was. It did not make sense that the man had come to the mercenary guild just to hire one Necromancer and bring him all the way out there. The C-ranker laughed that the Necromancer was completely clueless. The Necromancer demanded a verbal explanation to at least confirm his suspicions. As the C-ranker had expected, the Necromancer must not have cleared that dungeon by luck. Just as Ding-hoon suspected, they had been curious about the fortuitous encounter that happened within the dungeon. They had no idea how the MC had somehow cooked and beat the top ranker Soil, but that was why they went so far as to bring him out to the dungeon so that they could find out. However, the sleazy guy confessed that they had no intention of fighting the Necromancer. That statement really amused the Necromancer because he was not buying it. However, they were rather sincere about that. They had invited him here to show him that they were the type to lack morals and honor, and they wanted to see if he was interested in joining their despicable crew. Of course, if he wanted to join them, they were going to have to give them some of what he had gotten from his fortuitous encounter, and he had said that word enough times that Ding-hoon was getting sick of it. The sleazy guy insisted that their team was fair when it came to distribution. The Necromancer thought their team was crazy, and not in a cool way. To summarize their despicable words, they were villains and they wanted him to join them. If he agreed to join them, then they wanted him to hand over his rewards. Well, it was a very difficult situation that Ding-hoon had found himself in, but he thought those sons of female dogs could go to the depths of the underworld. Immediately, Boney 3 was instructed to get useful. The skeleton with glowing green eyes hopped to it and pulled out its bow with the intention of wiping those nincompoops out. Arrows were fired and it seemed they could bark more than they could bite because a few of the hunters looked concerned to have arrows suddenly flying at them. However, the sleazy ringleader easily swiped the arrows away with a swing of his dagger. It seemed he was carrying this evil team on his back, and he chuckled in dark glee at our guy's response to his offer, promising to make the Necromancer regret it. Ding-hoon's only regret was accepting to go on a mission with a bunch of animals in the first place, and he would never team up with their disgraceful selves. The skeletons charged forward with their swords raised, and the sleazy guy grunted as he raised his sword to block their attacks. He laughed, saying that the Necromancer thought that he had become stronger just because he gained a chance. The Necromancer was just a porter a few days ago, and that would not change just because of a little upgrade. The Hunters of Evil kept fighting the skeletons as the MC watched, noting that the ringleader was a lot stronger than he had thought. Then again, that was to be expected of a C-rank hunter, but the dude's strength level was close to B rank. It was a really troublesome situation. However, this was for the better. The blue-haired guy kept struggling with the skeletons with a grunt and a growl. Then, the evil sleazy ringleader chuckled like a one-piece villain. He goaded the MC, asking him if he thought that he could win because he was fighting only the ringleader. However, that assumption was a big mistake. The sleazy guy asked the Necromancer if he knew why they would fearlessly wander into unknown rank dungeons in the first place. The Necromancer paused for a moment when he recognized the unmistakable scent of bloodlust. He yelled out for his bony and the skeleton just managed to block the thrown dagger with his sword. The Necromancer grunted as even he, the summoner, felt the impact of that thrown dagger. The evil ringleader kept laughing madly as he bobbed and weaved with an evil dark aura starting to pour from him. The evil guy called the MC a sorry rat. That was because the hunter that had suddenly appeared behind him was an high-rank assassin from the Shadow Lurkers. The high-rank assassin could not believe who he had been called out to fight, and he asked first to make sure that they had the right guy. He did not believe that the weak-looking Dinghun was the one who had cleared the dungeon when Gisoil could not. The sleazy guy replied that it was true to the assassin who was his brother, there was nepotism at work. The Necromancer did not look particularly strong though, so the high ranker doubted it a little. Meanwhile, our guy was absolutely horrified to see an high-rank hunter of all things appear on this battlefield. There was no way out of this very difficult situation, and it was a miracle that he had lasted this long against B-rank hunters. With a high-rank hunter intervening now, our guy was as good as dead. The F-rank girl reached out to him with tears in her eyes, apologizing for causing the Necromancer unnecessary trouble. They thanked him so much. Even though they would meet their end, they were really grateful, and they were already saying their goodbyes because they were so sure that he would definitely lose. The Necromancer felt so sorry for the F-rankers, wondering what they had done to deserve getting sacrificed like this. They were so pathetic. He did not see why they should be sacrificed just because they were weak. So, the Necromancer would not give up. He wanted more than anything to save them. An high-rank assassin was all he had to face, so he grit his teeth in preparation. Dinghun now had a super powerful ally who was strong enough to trample even high ranks to the ground. So, he activated the skill that was teaching all techniques, the S-rank skill. Trapped in a desert dungeon facing a sleazy evil bandit of a hunter and his even sneakier high-rank assassin brother. The master could not believe the situation and he hissed in disappointment. He knew this would happen when a novice like his student had said that he would start wandering around, going on missions when he was barely prepared. Of course, the first thing the old man did was berate his student, even as his student whispered that this was definitely not the time to be scolding him. It was an urgent situation and he needed some good advice. The old man was unamused about the advice and just told Dinghun to accept his fate as he was no match for those guys. It was the most depressing piece of advice the pair guy had received, and it was the worst moment for such negativity too. The old man thought it was so pitiful that the Necromancer claimed to be his disciple and he could not even handle such a weakling. Dinghun begged the old man to please stop lamenting because if he died here, the old man would no longer be able to fulfill his goal. The old man muttered that he never told the Necromancer to get involved in such a mess, and he was the one who should be aggrieved. Then he called Dinghun a brat for good measure. The old man lamented that even if he had mastered all the techniques, he could not make the impossible happen, and this situation they had found themselves in was heavily impossible. This was the first time the high ranker was meeting our guy, so he proceeded to ask nicely. He asked what the Necromancer had gained from the opportunity in the previous dungeon. Suddenly, the Necromancer realized those guys just wanted the reward that he had obtained from the dungeon. So, there was a solution to his situation after all. They were trying to intimidate him and pretend to be the ones in control, but they would be in trouble if he did not cooperate and share his secrets. In that case, even the old man came to the conclusion of a method that they could use in this situation. The Necromancer knew that they wanted to learn as much as they could about the opportunity that he had landed. They agreed that was all they wanted. They wanted the reward from a dungeon that even a great fighter like Gisoil could not clear, so of course they were curious. Well, if that was what they wanted, of course, one guy would tell them what it was. After all, the high-rank hunter deserved to know, and the hunter was quite pleased to see that at least our guy was sensible enough to make such a wise decision. However, the Necromancer added that he would not tell the others his secret unless he let him fight the backstabbers who planned on sacrificing the two F-rankers. Until he had fought them, the frustration and resentment in the MC's heart would not let him speak. If they did not like the deal that he presented, then they would sue him because he was the one holding all the secrets anyway, and he grinned behind his skeletons. The high-rank hunter took a moment to consider the situation. The girl he was rescuing was also rather confused about this new turn of events. Dinghun laughed and asked them to please understand that he had a sort of mental illness and that no matter how dangerous the situation was, he could not stand his pride getting hurt. The high ranker asked the Necromancer what he was scheming, as if they had the right considering they were scheming from the start. However, he just waved their worries away, saying that he knew there was no way for him to escape them. And even if he was scheming something, he could never deceive the eyes of a high-rank hunter. The high-ranker agreed that the Necromancer had a point and the sleazy guy was starting to get nervous about this new turn of events. He asked why his brother was hesitating and not just beating up the Necromancer, asking if the high-ranker was seriously paying attention to that nonsense. However, the Azero ranker was indeed paying attention to that nonsense. Besides, the Necromancer was about to die anyway. After all, there was no one who could dare think that they could survive with the Shadow Lurkers right in front of them. However, even if he died, he would not let those backstabbing jerks walk away unscathed. So, he wanted more than anything to have the opportunity to beat them up. If the Azero rank guy could not accept this deal, then he could just kill the Necromancer. In fact, Ding-hoon was willing to end his own life, much to the despair of his summoned skeletons who were wondering why he was busy losing his mind behind them. The high ranker called for Ding-hoon to pause his madness for a minute as he considered his options here. His brother was also alarmed, but he was also silenced as well. The high ranker then decided that the best course of action would be to give Ding-hoon exactly 30 minutes, but if he tried anything foolish, then the assassin would make sure the Necromancer lived forever in agony, unable to die. The high ranker then asked if our guy understood the threat. So, the high rank hunter gave Ding-hoon exactly 30 minutes. If he tried anything funny, then he would live a life full of agony forever and would never be able to die freely. That was the threat, and our guy was asked if he understood. Of course, our guy understood. The sleazy jerk was absolutely horrified by this new turn of events, but he gassed himself up with some bravado, saying that the Necromancer had no chance of beating him. The Necromancer laughed that they would not know until they tried, and he squared up with his skeletons. Alright, now that the stage was set, the master would intervene as promised earlier. This time, he would replace the day's training with real-time practical guidance. Now, he asked what the Necromancer planned to do to face the waiting assassin. Ding-hoon reasoned that he needed to conserve his strength as much as possible, and his master agreed with that verdict. Using minimal effort for maximum effect was the best strategy to be utilized, and he would even teach our guy a strategy for using his opponent's strength against them. The MC was very grateful that he was finally getting some help and then asked his skeletons to take down his enemies. The sleazy group of villains screamed as they fought against the skeletons that charged them. There was a lot of fighting going on, and the ringleader leapt into the air with a high and mighty slash. He battled against the shield skeleton warrior, and more arrows came down from the bow skeleton. The hunters dodged the shots as best as they could while groaning in pain. The ringleader growled in annoyance and called our guy a brat for daring to fight against them like this. A mighty explosion was fired by the mage skeleton who had also joined the battle and seemed to be having the time of his life beating off the awful foes. He even laughed a sort of clacking chuckle as he activated the fireball. Then, the mage laughed as a huge fire rose up around their enemies and some of the other hunters beat a hasty retreat as the fire came down on them. They screamed and shouted, wondering when skeletons started throwing fireballs. The skeletons fought hard and raged, beating up the evil hunters with a lot of vengeance burning in their hearts. The sword of the ringleader broke and he then realized that they were at a serious disadvantage in this fight. Cursing, he cried out as he was kicked backwards by a skeleton, shouting in pain as he fell. Their moves were flawless and clean, and at this rate, the Necromancer might win the battle. They could not allow that, and the rank guy's eyes widened when he noticed something. He felt a heavy presence suddenly at the dungeon entrance, and he wondered why he could suddenly feel that energy there when he should be outside and on the lookout. His sleazy brother fell to the floor with a groan of pain, and then he also noticed something odd. He had fallen at the Necromancer's feet, and Ding-hoon towered over him with a glare on his face, looking pretty cool in his dark clothes. The sleazy C ranker cursed as he edged backwards, asking the MC not to dare to come any closer, and then he begged for the Necromancer to spare him. The fighters were too weak for that to even count as combat experience to the old master, but it was a good start. The Necromancer assured his master that he would get real combat experience with that assassin. The old master chuckled and told our guy not to get cocky. He would have to put everything on the line if he wanted to win against the high ranker at his level. However, the Necromancer had already put his life on the line from the start. He called out to Bony One but paused when his eyes widened. Suddenly, he noticed something too. A presence of someone striding towards them while wearing a long and flappy cloak. Something was coming. The old master groaned and called his student a fool, as another like that assassin had joined the field. And this of course greatly scared Ding-hoon. The old man asked because our guy was good at everything else but he never thought ahead. The Necromancer realized that too and that they were now in a very difficult situation. The old man was right. The MC no longer had any more tricks up his sleeve. He was still a weakling in the hunter world. Even if he did not want to admit it, he had to. He then wondered why he was so confident about fighting powerful foes all by himself. To make a gamble like that was a foolish decision. It was a decision so foolish that the black-haired jerk tossed back his head and laughed at his cartoon villain chuckle. The sleazy C ranker asked if the Necromancer had thought that they would come with only one senior from the shadow lurkers. It served our guy right to assume that he could trick them. The dark figure drew closer, and our guy cursed as his luck got worse and worse. He wondered if he should run when suddenly, the shadowy assassin whispered to his senior that they had to go because Gisoil had appeared. Both the skeletons and the Necromancer were in shock. They were surprised to hear that Gisoil was here. She stood before the portal in her usual impractical hunting outfit that left 70% of her skin exposed, with her arms crossed underneath her gigantic bosom. No one could figure out why such a high ranker was here, but the bad guys needed to move now as there was no time to think. If they got caught, they would be dead for sure. The high ranker had to admit that his colleague was right. So, they both vanished, completely abandoning the sleazy gang of hunters, much to the C ranker's shock. The C ranker cried out for his senior to return, but he was long gone and there was only dust left where he had been standing. Ding-hun, meanwhile, was shocked and speechless at the new turn of events. He wondered if this sudden panic and flee was the power of a rancor. Meanwhile, some time passed with Soil just standing at the entrance of the portal gate. She wondered if she was overreacting here. Following the Necromancer this far would definitely look like she was stalking him, and she did not want to come off as desperate. The talented huntress had been able to track down her target in this dungeon with pairings information. But now that she had gotten there, she was unsure what step to take. It was not right for her to come this far, and she was completely oblivious to the fact that she had saved his life. The talented huntress recalled that her new necromancer friend had promised that he would tell her once he had sorted things out if she gave him time. So, she decided that he would wait a bit more for his proper answer and quickly took her leave away from the gate. Meanwhile, back inside the dungeon, the sleazy guy was cursing his absolute bad luck. He stumbled to his feet as his teammates got knocked around into the ground. He refused to die like this, but he was just fine letting his goons die like this as they got knocked about by the skeletons. The sleazy guy was determined to live and to live. He was going to use everything he had. His wicked eyes fixed on the two F-rankers who had been cowering in a corner. So, the scene was set. They were at the ruins of the Scorpion King and a vicious battle was going down between the skeletons and the evil hunters. The evil ringleader was exhausted and beaten up, and he was just about tired of getting whooped by the bone soldiers. Ding-hun could not help but notice just how hard the C-rank hunter was trying, but he could see right through him. There was no way that sneaky guy could beat the MC using force alone, which meant that he was likely planning to do something to the porters hiding behind the necromancer. The sleazy jerk rushed forward and our guy called out to Boney to stop that man. Boney leapt into action, clacking and swinging his mighty sword. The sleazy guy was rather alarmed when the sword swung, and there was a huge bang as his arm was sliced clean off. It was a shocking development as the dude got dismembered like he was a cheap monster from a dungeon. The C-ranker howled in bloody pain as his arm was severed from his body. The necromancer knew that if he had been weaker, he would not have been spared by such a wicked man. Now, the wicked man knelt at his feet before Ding-hun, bleeding in pain. The C-ranker was a sneaky man, dangerous to keep alive. The same went for the rest who joined his villain group. The sleazy guy couldn't care less about the tough decision our guy was trying to make. He screamed and cursed at him, calling him a rather unsavory name. He felt that the necromancer thought that he would just lie down and take this abuse. However, the sleazy guy still once again leapt to his feet. He charged, screaming bloody murder as he raced for the MC. There was another well-intended slash by Boney, and this time it aimed for the wicked man's legs. The gore was immeasurable and the man screamed again. The pain was intense and he gritted his teeth to fight back his howl of agony. However, it was not enough and he crumpled to the floor once more, screaming and crying from the pain. The wicked man cursed at Ding-hun again. He cursed and screamed as his body bled, asking why the necromancer had to appear before him and curse his life like this. The necromancer then asked what the C-ranker was talking about. He was the one who had appeared before him. He was the one who decided to recruit and then blackmail the necromancer. Ding-hun had very little to do with this unfortunate encounter. The wicked man gurgled in pain and then slumped with his neck exposed, telling the necromancer not to waste any more time. The C-ranker accepted his defeat, and he wanted to die already, rather than live enduring the pain of his failure. The necromancer considered that, however, he smirked wickedly and told the wicked villain that he would not be dying so easily. The wicked man grits his teeth and he curses at our guy, calling him some awful names. He screamed and cried for the necromancer to just kill him already, annoyed that he had to go to these lengths just to beg for death. However, the C-ranker's hand was suddenly grabbed by one of the skeletons. The man groaned and whined in pain, asking what the bony guy was doing. The skeleton lifted the struggling villain and dragged him off, despite his complaints and his demands to be let go. The C-ranker was tossed onto the altar where he had planned to sacrifice the F-rankers, and the necromancer reminded the villain that they needed to sacrifice 2 living hunters to open the boss room. So, the skeleton picked up yet another of the fallen hunters and placed him on the altar. The C-ranker was horrified and cursed about being doomed to a fate that he was totally going to doom others to. The sacrifices had been placed, and the conditions were being checked. Had this whole twist not happened, Ding-hun would have immediately backed out of the dungeon without clearing it. However, now that things had come to this was a different story. He could not just let these dangerous guys go, and the opportunity was provided where he did not have to end them himself. The necromancer was simply giving what he got, and a bright light came over the 2 sacrifices. The F-rankers watched in fear as the MC made up his mind to repay kindness with kindness, and to avenge wrongs with vengeance. If someone sought to take a life, then the MC would not hesitate to take theirs. Still, the C-ranker was really determined to curse his way to hell as he kept swearing at our guy till the very end. The conditions had been met and the 2 sacrifices were absorbed immediately. The ancient seal was being lifted and the markings glowed. Ding-hun wished the evil people goodbye, and there is a next life. He hoped that they lived well. By the way, he glanced behind him and he wondered why Gisoil was not here yet when her coming had been announced a few moments ago. The shadow lurkers had run away in fear of her arrival, and if it were not for her, things could have gone very wrong indeed. The necromancer would have had to fight 2 rank hunters, which would have surely resulted in his death, and he might have ended up on that altar instead of the 2 bad guys. Suddenly, he glanced at the altar and was shocked to see both the bodies were gone. taken as offerings. Then, the ground began to shake and the ancient scorpion had been unsealed. There was a loud shout from the cavern it hid within, and its rage that had been suppressed for ages was now erupting to the heavens. The two F-rankers were quite terrified about this development. The awakened skeletons were also suppressed by the presence of a strong being. All stats were reduced by 20%, and our guy had to admit that he was feeling a little nervous now. The F-ranker nervously asked if things would be okay, and Ding-hun admitted that he did not know, but one thing was for sure. Facing whatever monster that came out of that pit was much better than facing those shadow lurkers from before. The F-ranker had to agree there with a small smile, and the Necromancer had to remind himself to calm down. He just had to do what he was trained for. The master laughed in amusement at his disciple, amused that the Necromancer intended to handle such a lowly creature without his help. The Necromancer was horrified to hear this news, and the old man went on to say that if our guy could not handle something like that, then it was better for him to just die. Ding-hun was horrified and told his master not to joke around with such a serious face. However, his master insisted that he was not joking and that he would indeed be off. He also reminded the young lad not to forget to summon him the next day. The Necromancer was shocked to see that his elder was truly leaving. The duration of the skill teachings of all techniques had ended, and the Necromancer was horrified to learn that the time limit was up already. He had wasted too much time fighting those nobodies, and now the Scorpion King was rising. It appeared from the cavern with all the rage and resentment that it was said to have, and giant pincers intending to do maximum damage. It glared at our guy with hatred and he gulped in fear. In the end, he would have to face that thing by himself, so he could only ask the great beast to come at him. Ding-hun was terrified as the scorpion monster approached. The skeletons stood at the ready with their weapons drawn, and they all sat prepared and waiting for the monster to show itself. The Necromancer was wary, hoping that of all things it was not an attack coming from underground. He yelled out to Boney 5, who immediately whipped out his magic stick. The skeletal mage used the air shield, and then the Necromancer commanded all the others to spread out and to make a formation. The skeletons did as commanded, and the shield settled itself in front of the Necromancer. The skeleton with the bow pulled out his weapon, but he froze when it sensed a vibration coming from deep underground and beneath its feet. Just as Ding-hun had feared, the monster was indeed coming from beneath their feet, and it rose from the ground with a mighty cry. The Necromancer was horrified that the beast had ignored him and then attacked Boney 3 that had been standing behind him. Then, the Necromancer feared that this monster could have intelligence. The Scorpion King growled and turned its angry attention to his foes. Spinning around in the sand, the giant scorpion focused on the skeletons gathered around it. The skeletons were alarmed, but the creature's eyes gleamed as it located its target. The Necromancer then yelled to Boney 4, and the skeleton obediently moved into position. Bonehead 4 used the skill low-level taunt and slammed the mighty shield to the ground, intimidating the giant scorpion. The scorpion screamed back, refusing to be beaten by a bag of bones. It charged forward, just as Ding-hun had expected it to, and they prepared for its arrival. The skeleton with the shield met the Scorpion King in harsh locked combat, and he used the skill to block the giant monster's attack. The MC was pleased to see that it had worked. Now was his chance, and he locked eyes with the mage, who nodded its understanding. Everyone, all the skeletons, it was time for them to attack together. All the skeletons rushed at the monster before them, and our guy stretched out his staff. The fireball and the arrows hit the tough shell of the monster and it roared in agony. Ding-hun rejoiced at finally locating a weakness that he could exploit. If the monster has a weak point that was not even necessary, cause no enemy could triumph against a gang-up. The scorpion growled in rage and roared in anger, swinging its tail left and right. It was still putting up a rather harsh fight, and the skeletons braced for combat. Although it was quite difficult to fight the large monster, their attack had been effective. They were finally inflicting damage on it, and it was bleeding from a few of the wounds they'd created. Ding-hun cheered on the skeletons, telling them not to worry if they died, and to just keep attacking. The skeletons clacked their agreement, and our guy considered his options. He only had 50 energy left, so he had to make it count. As long as he had the energy left to summon skeletons, then his skeletons were basically invincible, and the idiot did not spare a moment to consider leaving behind energy to crawl through the desert once he had won. The scorpion was not the only thing getting brutalized out there, and the skeleton took a sharp pincher to the face as the giant lashed out. However, no sooner had the skeleton died than Ding-hun smugly summoned it again. He was way too smug for someone in this situation, and he consumed energy to summon Bonehead 1, who he might as well not have named if that was what he ended up naming them. The scorpion was also not into this new wave of enemies after taking down the last annoyances. Still, the skeletons marched on with their weapons in hand. Ding-hun happily yelled for Boney 1 and 2 to charge at the enemy. The Scorpion King took a few slashes to the face from that charge, and he was not happy about it. The scorpion lashed out with its tail, and still the skeletons raged and fought. They charged at the scorpion with deadly precision, and the large monster cried out in pain once again. The Necromancer was relieved by this turn of events, and finally defeated the ancient desert Scorpion King. He had got the enemy, and he was thrilled about it. Ding-hun fell to his knees in relief, having just 10 energy left. If the scorpion had resisted more, he would have ended up the one who was defeated. The status of the Bonehead 1 was being adjusted, and all the stats had been increased by 1. The skill of the level 4 slash had increased by 2, and the status of Bonehead 2 was being adjusted. But all stats had increased by 1. The skill level of the low-level thrust had increased by 2. There was a lot of increasing going on, and the Necromancer was thrilled, as expected of a C-rank boss. The notification popped up that he had found the ancient desert scorpion king's venom gland. It was rated C, and he was asked if he would take it. The MC was surprised to have scored an item, but he happily accepted it, and he had obtained an item. The item was the ancient desert scorpion king's venom gland, and the Necromancer wondered if that was just an ingredient. The essence of the poison of the ancient desert scorpion king that was hidden within its tail. There were about 20 types of very toxic poisons inside of it. Effect 1. The venom gland could be used as an ingredient to make equipment. Effect 2. It could be used as a skill ingredient. This excited one of the skeletons, who clacked very noisily about this news. The Necromancer noticed, and the Bonehead reacted to the venom gland. A hidden condition had been fulfilled. The arrow Bonehead could not make poisonous arrows if he got the venom gland, a poison attribute skill ingredient that was D rank or higher. Dinghun was shocked to learn that a skill could be unlocked in such a way. He finally understood why the Dark Lord always said dungeon. The notification asked the Necromancer if he would still learn the skill poison arrow. Of course, our guy was only thrilled to learn a skill like that. The status of the Bonehead 3 was being adjusted. It had learnt the skill Poison Arrow level 1. The Necromancer was congratulated for clearing the stage of the ancient desert scorpion king. He then received the clear reward. A bright light shone on Dinghun's face, temporarily blinding him. The bright light shone, and so did the trees. The F-rankers and Dinghun had been transported outside of the dungeon, and the F-rankers cheered with joy at being saved. They were so NPC-coded that it was easy to forget that they were still stuck in that dungeon with the Necromancer. The porters happily thanked the Necromancer for his aid, and they said they would never forget this. He laughed and waved, saying that they should just think of this as a good lesson, and from now on, they should not go anywhere just because they were offered more money. The F-rankers happily waved our guy goodbye, and he waved as well. He was at least happy that that had been sorted out well. Then, it was finally time for the greedy Necromancer to happily check out his rewards. He had successfully cleared the dungeon, and that entitled him to the item of B rank, a trace of the ancient desert. The Necromancer had obtained the item called the Trace of the Ancient Desert. It was a B rank skill, and it glowed golden in his hand. This was a key. A key had magically appeared in his hand. Dinghun stared at it in surprise, and he was informed that it was a key to uncover the secrets of a hidden relic. It could unlock the dungeon Ancient Desert, and it was bound to the hunter Dinghun. The Necromancer then realized that this was some sort of linked dungeon or something. He was not sure about it, but he did not have time to dwell on it thanks to the river of dark locks approaching him. The Necromancer was standing by himself, wishing that someone could explain the situation to him, and who should appear but Gisoil, as if she was summoned or spying. The MC turned in surprise to see the Dark Empress standing behind him. He coughed lightly with a small smile and said that it had been a while. Our guy had asked to be given a little time to gather his thoughts, and she figured they should all be well and properly sorted by now, since he was now going in and out of dungeons. Besides, if he did not come back, she would think that he would probably never seek her out. Dinghun was alarmed because her words were true. He had completely forgotten about her. Laughing nervously, the skeleton shook its head at him. The Necromancer was unsure how to proceed and wondered if he ought to tell her the truth about his new powers. Then, he also wondered if he should mix some lies in. He glanced at the sword at her side and recalled that things would be bad if she caught him lying. Gisoil also looked rather murderous herself, so that was not a risk he was willing to take. So, the MC decided that he would just tell her the truth, since he figured that would be much more beneficial. So, he gulped but recalled that he was just a novice hunter who supposedly knew nothing about the world. She would have to be gentle with him. If he could use this as an opportunity to build a connection to a ranker, then he must seize it. So, he sighed and agreed to the Dark Empress' demands. She said that she wanted to know how he had cleared the dungeon and the reward that he had gotten from it. So, he would tell her everything. However, he only had one condition when it came to sharing this information with her. She was surprised to hear that there was a condition. First, he needed her to protect him until he grew stronger, and she was surprised to hear such a request. The Dark Empress asked if he owed someone a debt or something. However, the MC just admitted that he just had some bullies that were after him, as he thought of the high ranker. Then, the talented huntress asked what was next, since he said first, so there should be more. Then, he reminded her that he was a rookie, so he would happily learn from her, if she would be so kind as to teach him what she knew, within reason of course. For instance, he knew very little about the dungeon key that he had just obtained, and he showed it to her. Soil was surprised to hear this, and she pointed out that Dinghun had received a medium. He was surprised by her reaction, and he asked if she knew what that was. The Necromancer was also surprised that the small golden key could even surprise a ranker, and he wondered how much it was worth. The Dark Empress asked the Necromancer if he had gotten that key from the dungeon, and he admitted that he had. She then sighed that he was incredibly lucky. This was because the chances of finding a medium in a regular dungeon was almost zero. There was no less than 100 known in the world, plus it was bound, so he could not trade it. Alright, so what did it do then is what our guy really wanted to know, cause it just looked like a fancy golden key to him. The Dark Empress pointed out that the mediums were also a kind of fortuitous opportunity, as it seemed everyone was obsessed with the word fortuitous. The deeper a person delved into the mediums, the more linked quests appeared. Those linked quests increased in rank, eventually reaching S rank and above. Every medium that she knew of had done that. Ding-Hun was shocked to hear that some hunters had strayed into S rank territory just from owning mediums. Rankers, including Gi Soil, were desperately searching for these items, and she sighed in silence as she considered his luck at getting such a rare find. Then, she decided to accept his conditions, and the Necromancer beamed. However, she had a few conditions of her own, and the look on her face got serious. Later that day, someone with a gloved hand punched in a key code and a beep saying the door was opened. Then the Necromancer and the Dark Empress walked into a room. The Dark Empress was surprised to learn that the Necromancer had been living in a place like this, and he admitted that the place did look pretty shabby. He had already told her that there was no need for her to follow him all the way there. However, she insisted that she had to, since a promise was a promise. There were no surveillance devices or skills active here. No hunters above D rank around the building. He was safe for now. Ding-Hun was just surprised that she had been checking all that. The lady had confirmed his residence, and he would be staying on the rooftop for the time being. So, the Dark Empress told our guy to let him know when he was going training tomorrow. The Necromancer agreed. The Dark Empress offered to monitor the MC's training. Ding-Hun was surprised by this proposal, and she pointed out that she had been observing his energy since he had cleared that old man's dungeon. He had grown stronger exponentially, and she was most curious about how he was achieving this rapid growth. Well, our guy had already explained everything to the top ranker about the opportunity that he was benefiting from. Thanks to the old man and the type of training that he was receiving from him, the Necromancer's growth was rapid and flourishing. The only problem left was the shadow lurkers, and if they continued to threaten him, then he would give back as much as he got from that awful group of bullies. Then, the Necromancer's body was hit with pain and he screamed in agony. It was back to the super evil training, and the poor guy was really going through it. Meanwhile, his old master told him not to overreact and that his body was now starting to take shape. In other words, this meant that they needed to increase the intensity of the power massage, and the master reckoned that his student understood that. So, he continued happily pounding away. The Necromancer cried and protested, sobbing that this smackdown was just violence. The old man was irritated to hear such an accusation coming from his student. How dare his student, who should be grateful that the old man lowered his standards to consider him, describe his grand technique of the celestial artisan that was painstakingly crafted as something as vulgarly as simple violence. The little rat was told to brace himself, and his pleas fell on deaf ears. The old man yelled for the young lad to shut up and resumed his back-breaking massage. The Necromancer got a notification that his skill pain resistance had significantly upgraded to a B-rank skill, and it of course still had the potential for growth. The young Necromancer groaned in pain with his body bent to the ground. The entire time, Gi Soil watched him curiously. The Necromancer managed to drag himself to his feet and groaned as he asked the huntress what she was looking at. To be fair, the talented huntress had not a clue what was going on, but she would act as she did. No matter how many times she saw it, she could not get used to it. To think that the little low-ranker had been undergoing this kind of intense training every day since that time. The MC had already explained everything related to the old man to Gi Soil, and it was not like she could see him, not even when he was sitting right next to her. She could not follow the training just by watching. Meanwhile, the old man demanded that his foolish student stand since they still had 30 minutes left. The Necromancer groaned as he pushed to his feet. Bony 2 trained yesterday, so it was Bony 3's turn to have a go at training. The skeletons were growing stronger every day. And the problem was that the stronger they grew, the more the caster had to learn and train as well. So, the Necromancer checked his status window. He was a rank D Necromancer with a nice band of skills at his disposal. It was quite a lot, and the Necromancer smiled at seeing the signs of his hard work. Bony 1's slash, which was called rend. Bony 2's thrust was called pierce. Bony's 3's shot was called shoot, which shows that someone was slacking off when making Bony 3. Bony 4's block was called defend. The Necromancer had learned each of their skills except for the one of Bony 5, who was a mage. To learn Bony 5's skill, our guy would first need to unlock the ability to use Kai. A diagram was scratched out in the dirt of the grass, and the old master asked his student to get into the circle he had summoned and to sit cross-legged. So, our guy did indeed sit down, ensuring that all he was instructed to do for now was sit. The old man then told the young lady to recite the formula of the Great Blue Heart technique that he taught the Necromancer last time. However, the old man remembered to warn his student not to recite it mindlessly, and that he needed to focus and feel how the energy moved within him. So, the Necromancer focused, reciting as he did with his eyes closed. He was not to think it meaningless. Breathing was the most crucial step in this technique. If he could not feel Kai while he trained those dead skeletons in the basics, then there was no choice. The old man would have to judge him as talentless and intensify the training. The Necromancer was absolutely horrified to hear that he was going to get beaten to death by his sadistic master if he did not learn to keep up. So, the Necromancer realized he did not have a choice and focused even more on his concentration, on his breathing. and on sensing his Kai. If Dong-hun could get stronger, then he could endure anything. Slowly, as he focused, he began to feel the energy gathering in his hands. Later, in a fancy building with lots of lights, the Dark Empress stood by the balcony of the roof, just looking out at the world. She wondered if her new friend had really become that bizarre old man's disciple. It seemed so since she could see the results of the training, but a part of her was still rather doubtful about it. She could still remember the countless times that she was thrown by that old man. It had been a terrible experience, and just thinking of that old grouch sent shivers through her body. She had thought it was all because of the fortuitous opportunity, but the Necromancer's determination to endure the pain of his body being twisted and his bones being reconstructed, even the great huntress had to acknowledge it. So, Yisoil guessed she had no other choice but to observe him for now. That old man whom she could not do anything about was right beside the Necromancer, and just from watching him grow, she felt like she could break through her own limits someday. Meanwhile, the Necromancer was passed out and speechless on his bed after the intense training. As the Dark Empress wondered how far he would grow, and found it exciting, the poor Necromancer was sweating buckets. Meanwhile, at the Shadow Lurkers' headquarters, in the room of the CEO, there was wine poured into a sparkling glass, and a few Shadow Lurkers stood in the room, sweating bullets. So, someone of great importance heard that his Shadow Lurkers need support because of Yisoil. The rank Shadow Ranker nodded that was correct. The CEO hummed as he considered it since they were not keen on interacting with the pairing guild either. He was the owner of the Shadow Lurkers and ranked the 92nd in the world, with the alias Hellhound. His name was Nick Jacken. The rank Shadow Lurkers bowed, saying that he apologized. He should have dealt with it before Yisoil intervened, and Nick drummed his fingers on the table as he considered his options. He wondered if it was really an opportunity that would let him hold the rankers in the palm of his hand. Somehow the high ranker was convinced that this was so and said that seeing as that difficult woman, Yisoil, was taking interest, then he was certain of it. The Hellhound had to admit that the offer was tempting. Then, a finger gun was made and someone immediately appeared, asking if she had been called for. The Hellhound asked the mystery lady for the Shadow Lurker schedule, and she said that they were fully booked for the next month. So, the old CEO hummed for a moment as he considered his options. Ju Dong-hun was the one they were considering, and he asked what the Necromancer's rank was again. The Necromancer was an E rank and he still had a really long way to go. So, the handsome white-haired CEO made the decision to clear his schedule a month from now so that he could go see the Necromancer for himself. He would check out if this guy named Ju Dong-hun was even worth his attention. Meanwhile, the oblivious Necromancer was busy exercising and counting as Yisoil watched him do a number of exercises. The MC did up to 40 before just collapsing on the ground and panting for breath. The Dark Empress watched him and called out to the Necromancer. He asked what the problem was and she stepped closer, before finally saying that he had something to tell him. The Necromancer was genuinely surprised to hear that the beautiful lady had something to tell him, and he sat up curiously to hear about it. The Dark Empress could recall that she had promised to protect him from any ambush until he grew stronger. He agreed that was correct, though he had never thought that she would be watching over him every day like a highly trained babysitter and bodyguard. She pointed out that she could not protect him if she was not watching him all the time. He pointed out that she was a ranker and that she had dungeons to clear and guild matters to attend to, so of course he had not expected her to just stay within his line of sight. That was why she was telling him this now. She had been watching over him for about 2 weeks now, and even though she had been neglecting her guild activities, there were still things that she needed to do. So, the Necromancer now had 2 options to choose from. He could either follow the ranker around for 6 hours and they could go on a little well-deserved break, or he could use the key, the medium that he had obtained after clearing the dungeon back then. It was then that the Necromancer even recalled the existence of the key, and he summoned the rare item that was the trace of the ancient desert, a key to uncover the secrets of a hidden medium. Mediums were bound items, meaning it would be a solo dungeon and it might be safer for him to be inside the dungeon rather than being with her, since it would be a place where even rankers could not interfere. However, the Necromancer was hesitant since it was supposed to be a B-rank dungeon. He figured that it would be more dangerous inside the dungeon, and the ranker smiled. She told him that was not really the case, and that he might not realize how much he had grown. It could be a good opportunity for him to check his new strength, and from what she could see, he should be able to clear it with his current strength. The Necromancer blushed at her kind words, and he wondered if he had just gotten praised by an awesome ranker. As an abnormal Necromancer, no one acknowledged him as an E-rank mercenary, and it had all been very depressing. He couldn't believe that he was finally receiving someone's recognition, and he gripped his key tight. It was indeed a good idea, and he beamed that he would with the second option. The ranker had guessed that he would, and he pointed out that there was no reason to hesitate since he had finished his morning training anyway. Then, she asked him to infuse his energy into the key to activate it. The dungeon would then appear, so our dude gripped the key in his hand and infused his energy within. The key began to glow and a grin appeared on his face as it lit up. The notification asked if he would like to open the dungeon of the ancient desert, and he was warned that this would be a solo dungeon. Of course, he was ready and he told his babysitter that he would be back soon. The proud ranker could only just smile and nod at her sweetheart as the golden light enveloped him. Then, Dong-han smiled as the glow increased and transported him to the dungeon. His feet landed on the sand, and this was the ancient desert, where he had discovered the pyramid. The Necromancer activated his skull staff immediately and summoned his skeletons so that he would not be caught lacking. There was no need for him to rush and think logically. The dungeon would be inside the pyramid. So, he commanded the Necromancers to maintain formation and to keep up as he had no intention of digging for bones in a desert. The skeletons nodded as they marched after him. As D-ranks, they were bound to be too weak for this B-rank dungeon, so they had to fight like the weak, in large groups and large numbers. They got into the dark cave of the pyramid and progressed their march. It was a little easy to get there, and our guy stepped forward. Then a notification informed him that it was discovering a connection between the dungeon and the hunter's profession. The dungeon then began to transform and Hunwa was not allowed to exit the dungeon. His eyes widened in worry at this news, and the door behind them raced to close shut. He had completely dropped his guard and got caught for it. The door slammed shut behind them, and the skeleton with the shield protected our guy from the blast of blue light. He cried out as the dungeon began to transform and then screamed again at the dynamic transformation. Somewhere in the middle of all that, our guy got tossed to the ground. The MC shook and was able to believe that he had really walked into a trap with such confidence, and now he was stuck in a situation like this. He called out to Boney 3, and it was fortunate for him that his skeletons ended up stuck in there with him. They were going to scout out their surroundings first when suddenly a light shone right in front of them. The bonehead used the skill of secure vision and fired a light ahead of them so that they could see in the dark passage. There was an open space at the end there, but he wondered if this was even the right path. The Necromancer walked forward, believing that he had no choice but to go forward for now. The blue light glowed ahead and our guy covered his face in confusion as he realized that this was the stage, Resentment of the Sun Spear. It seemed they had arrived in a place filled with skeletons. Deep within the pyramid lay the warrior and absolute ruler of the ancient desert empire, the Sun Spear. The MC had to break through the obstacles and reach the Sun Spear. Hun's eyes widened at this news, and he wondered what on earth he had gotten himself into. The rain fell heavily from dark clouds to a sandy city below. There was a low growl from a figure who seemed to walk in the dark. This setting was a new switch from where we had earlier left off. Huge black wings spread with feathers falling from the span, and someone yelled out that it was a monster. The people yelled that it was a dirty and lowly creature. They yelled how dare a half-breed think that it can fit in with them, and yelled at the figure to just die already. Some tried to cut the person's hand off the moment that he was born. The dark-cloaked figure stared out at the screaming people with pain in his heart. Some of them had even tried to cut his ankles. In the end, someone even took his eyes and there was only a gaping black mass left behind. All the men screamed for him to die and they rushed at him with sharp weapons and rage. However, the black-eyed fighter also rushed forward and knocked back his attacker. The bald attacker screamed in pain and blood gushed from his body as he was slain. He fell to the floor before the feet of the man who stood barefoot, cloaked and hated. The figure that stood before the fallen men was a man with wings and a cloak, as well as a dangerous-looking staff. If everyone was going to try to take what was his, then the dark-cloaked figure would show no remorse. He stepped forward with his barely clothed foot on the wet sand, as he swore to also take what was theirs since they had done the same to him. Meanwhile, the army of skeletons stayed standing in the new place that our guy had found himself in. Hun was not particularly pleased to see them and he cursed. A warning came out and blared over and over again. 100 D-rank ancient skeleton spearmen were approaching, and they marched towards them with an unknown intent. First off, Boney 4 was to block from the front, and it was dangerous to fight in the open field. I have to lure them to a corridor where we stand a chance. Only a limited number of enemies can enter the corridor. They would hold and take a few out at a time. The skeletons marched forward with their spears raised as they moved with the intention to kill. The shield skeleton came to fight as well and he blocked the first barrage of attacks. It was a huge battle and the skeletons leapt in the array, skeletons against skeletons. It was a fierce battle and neither side dared to let up. The skeleton with the sword swung his mighty weapon. Hun thought that it was okay for now, but the shield could only hold for so long and Boney 4's durability would reach its limit eventually. The bonehead were told that they did not have to hold out recklessly, and that they should fall back slowly. The enemy skeletons clacked in battle mode and even grabbed at some of the bony legs. However, the arrow shooter quickly put an end to that, and the Necromancer shot a grateful glance back at the sharp-shooting skeleton. They would defeat the enemy one at a time and aim for the next target. More spears came charging at them and they did not dare to let up. The MC gasped with his mouth wide open when he realized that the next batch of spears was headed straight for him. However, he steeled himself and caught the spear before it even reached him, showing great talent and flexibility. The skeletons charged forward and slashed down the enemy skeletons. Hun congratulated the Boney on a very great job. A light shone and gleamed in Boney's eyes and the mage summoned a gigantic fireball above them. The boneheads used the skill Fireball, which was a level 8 skill. The fireball was thrown at the enemy skeletons, and many of them fell to the ground. The skeletons marched forward and trod on their fallen comrades underfoot. They kept marching with their spears in hand, unwilling to go down that easily. Their current fighting capacity still was not enough to beat the army of powerful foes. However, that was perfectly fine to the Necromancer, who told his enemies to keep on coming with a grin on his face. His own skeletons stood to guard him and the spear skeletons readied to attack. Once again, they launched their first attack at the shield skeletons, multiple spears hitting the shield at the same time. Suddenly, something happened at the shield skeleton's back. The Necromancer activated the skull staff, and he used the skill to summon the awakened D-rank skeleton. 10 energy was consumed to keep the shield skeleton from disappearing, and the enemy skeletons looked alarmed that their defeated foe had not fallen or died. The Necromancer could just pick up a new spear if it broke, and he would continue to stab it into his enemies, summoning his skeletons over and over again until he achieved victory, and he would use his own method and his own stance. He unlocked the Pierce C rank skill and leapt into the fray, determined to do some fighting of his own. He stabbed at the enemy skeletons relentlessly, and they charged at him as well, unwilling to spare either man or bone. Ding-Hun groaned when a spear skeleton approached, but he managed to block the first swing with his skull staff. He cursed at the bony enemy, and he cried out for them to just die already as his own skeletons echoed his desire with their relentless onslaught of the enemy. The sword was swung, the shield protected, arrows were shot, the lance was tossed around, and fireballs were thrown into the air. After a while, the Mech bent a little as he fought to catch his breath. He was going through a lot concerning the current situation, and after defeating the last skeleton, the Sun Spear sleeping in the pyramid had finally awakened. The Sun Spear was now watching our dude, and the monster sneered at him. The Sun Spear then wondered if the Necromans thought that he could face them with such skills. Ding-Hun found himself annoyed by the Sun Spear's jests, and he cursed at the enemy. The Necromancer did not really know who the Sun Spear was, but he had cleared a dungeon far worse than this, and he was the one who convinced the old man who even a ranker could not defeat. The Necromancer informed Bony 4 that they would be pushing forward from there on because that Sun Spear guy was taunting him from up there. The shield understood and nodded his agreement. Suddenly, a warning began to blare out. A whole new barrage of spear enemies rushed out at our dude, and 100 D-rank ancient skeleton spearmen were approaching. Ding-Hun gasped in horror to see them, and he wondered if the dungeon had a gimmick of spawning infinite skeletons until he reached the destination. The enemy was numerous, far outnumbering him, and at this rate, there would be no end to this. The Necromancer had to get to the end as soon as possible before he ran out of energy. The spears kept ramming against the shield skeleton as he pushed forward to get his master deeper inside the dungeon. Then, the Necromancer asked for Bony 4 to hand over his shield. He would be taking over from the skeleton now. Ding-Hun then slammed his shield into the ground for maximum intimidation. He told Bony 5 to cast an air shield on him, and the others could watch his back. They would ignore the mobs and run straight to the boss's room. It was either he reached the destination or he fell before he did. At any rate, the Necromancer was ready to roll the dice and find out. The Necromancer launched from where he stood, charging forward into the barrage of newly summoned skeletons. The spear skeletons waited at the ready for him to come to them, all their weapons drawn. The Necromancer did not have that much stamina left, but he would keep fighting and hold them off. If the skeletons got their left arms destroyed, then they were to use their right. Ding-Hun marched forward, using the shield to protect himself at all times. He groaned in struggle as the spears clashed against the shield. Then, he raised the shield and knocked the enemy back. He screamed in a head, unwilling to be taken down by a few skeletal goons. The objective was to break through the obstacles and to reach the Sun Lance, which seemed rather doable. The MC grits his teeth and gets busy, deciding that he will succeed or die trying. He knocks skeletons around left and right, determined that he just needs to touch this Sun Lance thing. The skeleton with the sword swung his sword. The Necromancer kept marching, taking down the enemy with each step forward, as he commanded his comrades to run. They needed to run as fast as they could. They just needed to get forward just a little more and could not waste time fighting NPCs. They just needed to get a little bit further, and then a bright light shone ahead of them. The Necromancer groaned as he fell over and the Sun Lance mocked him. It called him a pathetic human who was challenging him with such pitiful skills. Humans were surprisingly weak despite being so lowly and cunning. The Necromancer cursed, wondering what the jerky Sun Lance even knew. The MC was just an E-rank hunter after all, and he had greatly improved his skills recently. The skeletons kept marching forward and he cursed as he still had so many foes to fight. However, his skeletons were not given up and he was not about to throw in the towel either. However, Ding-Hun did wonder when this endless assault would come to a close. The skeletons kept up their guard while fighting these enemies as they swung their powerful weapons, but they couldn't fight for so long and Bony 1 took a spear to the eye. Fighting now would surely spell death for them if they carried on like this. Ding-Hun just needed to focus only on running, and he cursed at the dungeons. The more our guy fought, the darker his thoughts became with the fighting and the struggle, and he cursed at the dungeon and the situation he was going through. A long time later, the MC was huffing and puffing as he looked upon the huge pile of skeleton bodies before him. All of those bone fragments before him. They were the remains of all the skeletons that he had just fought. Ding-Hun was surprised and wondered if this dungeon was a circular structure. Then that meant that whether he went forward or backwards, then he glanced behind him. The skeletons with the spears still stood at the ready to cause trouble. The Necromancer would just end up meeting them again, and he wondered what to do. He grits his teeth and his summons brandish their weapons. Ding-Hun wondered at this point if he should fight or give up. He had just 20 remaining stamina while there were about 30 skeletons left. The Necromancer had no choice, and at this point, he would have to do whatever it took to triumph in the dungeon. He yelled to his skeletons and told them to lock the enemy as much as possible so that they could not get close. His skeletons immediately obeyed and worked hard to do as they were told. They leapt up with their brandished weapons, determined to take down the enemy. The Necromancer watched them, deciding that when the bones were blocking, he would break through somehow. He was going to get it together as there was no dungeon that he could not clear. The Necromancer climbed with his staff and gasped in relief that he had finally made it up. It was hard as heck, but success was satisfying. He had to break through the obstacles and reach the sunlance. Then, Ding-Hun wondered where exactly was the sunlance. He then looked up and noticed a huge gaping black hole in the ceiling, and he wondered if that could be where the sunlance was. So, he called his bony four and told him to come over. The Necromancer asked his summon to grab him and throw him with all of its strength. The sunlance laughed and taunted our guy for finally figuring it out. He called the human foolish and told him to come if he dared. The sunlance promised to turn out Guy into a handful of ashes, and the Necromancer told him to bring it on as they would find out who would win in combat. Ding-Hun then screamed and rushed forward, leaping towards the sinister-looking black hole. Two red eyes stared down at the MC, but the Necromancer was unafraid and reached towards the dark. He was congratulated for having reached the sunlance, and the ancient skeleton spearman disappeared. Ding-Hun internally celebrated his success, and he reached into the void, celebrating that he had gotten the sunlance. He yelled for the sunlance to come out so that he could see his face. Then, the Necromancer got a warning that the sunlance was appearing. The MC's eyes widened as the black void began to distort before him and he gasped and fell back. The S-rank skill of memory recollection was instantly used and our guy closed his eyes as the system informed him that they would be teleporting shortly. This panel marks the end of the latest chapter released so far for this series. I hope you enjoyed the quick coverage of the manhwa as usual, and are looking forward to more episodes as newer chapters get released. As always, if you're new to the channel and enjoyed my content, definitely consider subscribing. I upload new videos almost every single day, so you won't run out of content to watch anytime soon. The new year is fast approaching, and I wish you all nothing but the best of times going forward. Stay blessed as always, and I'll see you in the next upload. Until next time.